Before there was light, there was something else. Not fire, not energy, not even time as we understand it. Before the universe learned how to glow, it existed in a state we rarely name without fear. A state we instinctively misunderstand. A state we translate too quickly as absence. Darkness. Not the darkness of night skies dotted with stars. Not the darkness behind closed eyelids, but a deeper condition, one without reference points, without contrast, without the reassurance of illumination. Imagine a universe that does not announce itself. No flashes, no beginnings you could point to, no surface for light to bounce from. Only a vast, uninterrupted stillness, not empty, but unresolved. Most origin stories begin with brilliance, a burst, a spark, a moment where something suddenly appears. But that story may already be skipping the most ancient chapter, because light, by its very nature, is late. Light is not primordial. It is conditional. For light to exist, something must already be there, matter hot enough to radiate, space transparent enough to let photons travel, time stable enough to let motion unfold. Light is not the first actor on the stage. It is a reaction to a stage that already exists, and yet, we keep mistaking the spotlight for the origin. Picture the earliest universe not as a flash, but as a presence without features. A reality so uniform that nothing stands out. A state where difference has not yet learned how to announce itself. In such a place, nothing is highlighted. Nothing demands attention. There is no here and there, end quote. No foreground, no background, only a condition that does not need to be seen to exist. This is where our intuition begins to fail us. We are creatures shaped by contrast. We identify objects because they differ from their surroundings. We recognize meaning because something interrupts silence. We notice existence because it reflects light. So when we imagine a state without light, our minds jump to the word nothing and scream. But physics does not agree with our instincts. In the earliest measurable moments after the Big Bang, long before stars, long before galaxies, the universe was opaque. Light existed, yes, but it could not travel freely. Photons were trapped, scattered endlessly by charged particles. The universe was not dark because light was absent. It was dark because light had nowhere to go. Only hundreds of thousands of years later did space cool enough to let light finally move unimpeded. That moment left behind the cosmic microwave background, the oldest light we can still observe. Notice what that implies. Light did not mark the birth of the universe. It marked the moment the universe became transparent. Existence came first. Visibility came later. And this is where a quiet contradiction begins to form. If light requires conditions to appear, if darkness existed before those conditions, then darkness is not the failure of existence. It is the default state. What we call dark may not be emptiness at all. It may be the universe before it learned how to speak in photons. Think of darkness not as a void, but as a canvas before paint. Not erased, simply untouched. The universe may have spent its earliest ages not shining, but waiting. Not inactive, but unresolved. A reality humming beneath the threshold of visibility. And here is the unsettling part. That ancient state never truly disappeared. Darkness did not vanish when light arrived. It was merely interrupted. Every star, every galaxy, every glowing cloud exists like a brief annotation scribbled onto an otherwise silent page. Between those annotations lies the vast majority of reality, cold, dark, and unlit. Even now, if you could remove every star, every nebula, every luminous structure, the universe would not collapse into nothingness. It would simply return to what it mostly is, unseen, unilluminated, unannounced. We are taught to believe that light reveals truth, but perhaps light only reveals exceptions. Perhaps darkness is not the absence of content, but the absence of contrast. And if that is true, then the earliest universe was not empty, it was uniform. So uniform that nothing could stand out. So complete that nothing needed to announce itself. At this point, something important needs to be said clearly. you are drawn to quiet, expansive ideas like this, if you find yourself wanting to explore the universe not as spectacle, but as a slow, unfolding mystery, you are listening to Whispers of the Universe. And if you want this space to keep existing, to keep diving into these deeper questions that most stories skip over, take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who listens more than they speak, and subscribe to the channel. It's a simple action, but it keeps this quiet place alive. Now, let's go deeper. If darkness is not emptiness, then what is it? Modern physics gives us an uncomfortable answer. Even what we call empty space is not empty. Vacuum is restless. Fields fluctuate. Energy appears and vanishes. Particles blink into existence and dissolve again, too briefly to be observed directly. The universe never truly rests. It only becomes less expressive. Darkness, then, is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of emission. Light is what happens when matter is excited. Darkness is what remains when excitation fades. And here is where the idea quietly turns. Because if light depends on energy, and energy disperses over time, then light is temporary by definition. Stars burn fuel. Galaxies drift apart. Heat spreads, thins, evens out. The universe is not moving toward greater brilliance. It is moving toward equilibrium, toward silence. Not suddenly, not catastrophically, but gradually, so slowly that no living thing has ever witnessed the full arc. Each second, distant galaxies slip beyond the reach of our telescopes. Their light stretches, reddens, weakens, until it can no longer arrive at us at all. Not because those galaxies vanished, but because light failed to keep up. The universe is not becoming darker because darkness is advancing. It is becoming darker because light is retreating. And that distinction matters. Darkness does not need to conquer. It only needs to wait. Imagine a room where music is playing softly. If the speakers slowly lose power, the silence does not arrive. End quote. The sound simply fades. The room was always capable of silence. Sound was the interruption. This reframes everything. Light is not the foundation of reality. It is a temporary disturbance. Darkness is not the enemy of existence. It is the baseline from which existence briefly departs, which means the future of the universe is not a dramatic collapse into nothingness. It is a return, a cooling, a settling, a long, gentle exhale. Stars will stop forming. Existing stars will burn out. Galaxies will drift beyond interaction. Energy differences will smooth away. And what remains will look, to us, like nothing. But it will not be nothing. It will be the universe at rest, a state closer to its origin than to its luminous middle age. And here is the quiet thought that lingers. If darkness is the oldest condition, if it precedes light and outlasts it, if it does not require energy, motion, or contrast to exist, then perhaps light is not the true story of the universe. Perhaps light is only a brief sentence written across a page that was already there and will remain long after the ink fades. So before we ask how the universe began shining, we may need to ask something far stranger. What was the universe doing before it needed to be seen? Darkness is often described as a lack, a failure, a gap where something meaningful should be. But that description reveals more about us than about the universe. We are visual creatures. We build our sense of reality around what can be outlined, illuminated, separated from its surroundings. To us, existence announces itself by reflecting light. So when light is absent, we instinctively assume something is missing. Yet the universe has never shared that assumption. Imagine standing in a space with no landmarks, no horizon, no edges, no shadows to define depth. Not because there is nothing there, but because everything is evenly present. In such a place, your eyes would fail you. Not because reality has vanished, but because contrast has. This is the first mistake we make when we think about darkness. We confuse invisibility with non-existence. In physics, empty space is a misleading phrase. What we call vacuum is not a void, it is a condition. State filled with fields, fluctuations, latent energy, and probabilities constantly brushing against becoming real. Even in perfect darkness, space is active. Particles flicker into being and disappear again, too briefly to leave a trace. Fields vibrate at their lowest possible energy. The universe does not switch off, it quiets down. Darkness, then, is not the absence of things. It is the absence of distinction. Light creates difference. It allows one region to stand out from another. It gives objects boundaries and identities. Without light, those boundaries dissolve not because they are gone, but because they are no longer emphasized. Think of darkness not as an eraser, but as a leveler. When everything shares the same condition, nothing draws attention. This idea becomes uncomfortable when we push it further. Because if darkness is not emptiness, then the earliest universe was not a blank slate waiting to be written on. It was already full, just unreadable by any method we now rely on. The primordial universe was not defined by things happening. It was defined by things not standing out. Uniformity, not void. This is why the earliest stages of the cosmos are so difficult to describe. Our equations can point toward them, but our intuition collapses. We are trained to recognize events, explosions, formations, transitions. But the most ancient state of reality may have been eventless. No contrasts, no gradients, no highlights, just a condition that did not need to express itself. In that sense, darkness is not a stage waiting for actors. It is the stage before roles exist. Light requires imbalance. It needs heat differences, charged particles, movement. It emerges when energy is unevenly distributed. Darkness, by contrast, requires nothing extra. It is what remains when nothing insists on being noticed. This is why darkness can be older than light, not because something happened to remove illumination, but because illumination had not yet learned how to happen. And even now, darkness remains the dominant state of the universe. For every star you can see, there are vast regions where no photons are being emitted at all. Between galaxies lie distances so immense that even light struggles to cross them before the universe expands further. Most of reality does not glow. Most of reality does not announce itself. Most of reality exists without caring whether it is observed. This realization forces a subtle shift. If darkness is the background condition, then light is not a foundation, it is a deviation, a temporary excitation, a ripple on a surface that otherwise remains flat. Stars are not proof that the universe is bright. They are proof that brightness is rare. And rarity matters, because we tend to mistake rarity for importance. We assume that what stands out must be central, that what draws attention must be fundamental. But nature does not operate on aesthetic priorities. The universe does not organize itself to be seen. It organizes itself according to stability, and stability favors darkness. As energy spreads out, differences flatten. Heat flows from hot to cold. Motion disperse. Excitations decay. Light, as a carrier of energy, slowly drains the systems that produce it. Every photon emitted is energy leaving a source forever. Every glowing object is, in a quiet sense, erasing itself. Darkness does not consume stars. Stars consume themselves into darkness. This reframes the idea of cosmic history. The universe did not begin dark, become bright, and then fall into darkness again as a failure. It began in a state where light was unnecessary. Then, briefly, learned how to glow. And now, very slowly, is forgetting. Not through collapse, not through violence, but through balance. The universe is not moving toward nothingness. It is moving toward sameness, a state where no region has enough energy difference to stand out from another, a state where nothing needs to emit light to exist. This is why darkness feels unsettling to us. It resists storytelling. Stories depend on contrast, beginnings and endings, figures and backgrounds, changes that can be tracked. Darkness offers none of that. It does not progress. It does not climax. It does not resolve. It simply remains. And yet, this remaining may be the most fundamental property of reality. There were stars to mark positions, before there were particles to scatter photons, before there were observers to ask questions, there was a condition that did not require recognition. Darkness does not demand interpretation. It does not ask to be understood. It simply is. Which leads to a quieter, more unsettling question. If darkness is not absence, but baseline, if light is not origin, but interruption, then perhaps existence itself does not need events to justify it. Perhaps reality does not begin with action, but with presence. This would mean that the earliest universe was not waiting to become something else. It was already complete in a way we no longer recognize. And light, with all its beauty, its information, its stories, arrived later, like a language invented after the fact. A language that allows us to notice, to measure, to narrate, but not a language that defines what is real. Because what is real does not require illumination. It only requires consistency. Darkness is consistent. It does not fluctuate wildly. It does not burn fuel. It does not exhaust itself. It does not age in the way luminous things do. In fact, darkness may be the only condition that does not wear out. This raises a thought that feels almost paradoxical. Perhaps darkness is not what remains after everything ends. Perhaps it is what remains because nothing needs to continue. Not a ruin, a rest state. And if that is true, then the future of the universe is not something to fear. It is something to recognize. A return to a condition that has always been there, beneath every star, behind every glow, surrounding every burst of brilliance. A condition that does not announce itself because it does not need to. And as we begin to understand darkness not as loss, but as foundation, a deeper question begins to form. If darkness does not mean nothing, if it is full, stable, and ancient, then what, exactly, was the universe doing all that time, before light ever had a chance to arrive? There was a long stretch of time when the universe existed, and nothing could be seen. Not because there was nothing to see, but because seeing had not yet become possible. This period does not sit comfortably in our imagination. We tend to compress it, to rush past it, to treat it as an awkward pause between a dramatic beginning and a luminous story. But in cosmic terms, this pause was not brief at all. It lasted hundreds of millions of years. After the initial expansion, after matter had formed, after space itself had settled into something stable enough to persist, the universe entered a phase with a name that feels almost dismissive. The Dark Ages. Not poetic darkness, not metaphorical darkness. A literal era in which no stars existed anywhere, no suns, no galaxies, no glowing structures of any kind. Hydrogen and helium filled space almost uniformly, drifting, cooling, slowly responding to gravity. Photons were present, but weak, stretched thin, no longer energetic enough to light anything up in a meaningful way. The universe was alive, but visually silent. This is where a strange realization begins to take shape. Existence does not require illumination. It never did. For hundreds of millions of years, the universe carried mass, motion, gravity, and time itself without producing a single star. Reality did not wait for light to begin functioning. It functioned without witnesses. In that era, there was no night sky, no darkness punctured by points of light, just darkness, uninterrupted, extending in all directions. If an observer could have existed in a hypothetical consciousness floating through space, it would have seen nothing change. No sunrise, no flicker, no reference points to mark the passage of time. And yet time was passing. Gravity was working. Matter was slowly gathering into denser regions. Structures were forming invisibly. This challenges one of our deepest assumptions. We assume that events define time. That change must be observable to be real. But the universe was changing profoundly while remaining unseen. The first stars did not appear because something suddenly happened. They appeared because something had been happening quietly for an unimaginably long duration. Gas cooled. Slight density differences grew. Gravity amplified tiny imbalances. All of this occurred without light. Means light is not the engine of cosmic evolution. It is a side effect. The Dark Ages were not an empty waiting room. They were a workshop with the lights turned off. This is difficult to accept because we rely so heavily on visual confirmation. In human terms, What cannot be seen often feels unreal. In cosmic terms, what cannot be seen may simply be unfinished. The universe did not rush to become visible. It took its time. And when the first stars finally ignited, they did so unevenly, one region at a time, one dense pocket, collapsing under its own gravity. One small ignition amid an otherwise unbroken dark. Light did not arrive as a flood. It arrived as a leak, tiny, isolated points of brightness, scattered across an ocean of darkness. Even then, darkness remained dominant. For every newborn star, there were vast distances of unlit space. For every luminous region, there were millions of regions still unchanged. The universe did not flip a switch. It hesitated. And that hesitation tells us something important. If light were essential, it would have arrived immediately. If brightness were the natural state of reality, darkness would be unstable. But the opposite is true. Darkness is stable. Light requires effort. Stars must constantly fight gravity and entropy to keep shining. They must burn fuel, maintain pressure, sustain reactions. The moment that balance fails, the light fades. Darkness does not require maintenance. It does not burn out. It does not collapse. It does not age. This is why the Dark Ages were not a failure of the universe to produce light. They were the universe being itself. Before complexity, before contrast, before expression, and even after light emerged, the universe never left that state entirely. We often imagine cosmic history as a simple arc, dark light, dark again. But that is not accurate. The universe did not leave darkness behind. It layered light on top of it. Darkness remained underneath, between, and beyond every luminous structure. Even today, the majority of space is still in that original condition, cold, dark, and quiet. The era of stars is not the main story. It is an interlude, a relatively brief chapter where matter happened to arrange itself in a way that allowed energy to glow. Which brings us to an uncomfortable question. If the universe existed, functioned, and evolved for hundreds of millions of years without light, if it can continue existing long after stars fade, then what exactly is the role of light? Perhaps light is not a necessity, but a luxury, a temporary window that opens when conditions align just right. And windows, by definition, close. The Dark Ages show us that darkness is not an endpoint. It is a beginning, but not the kind of beginning we like to tell stories about. It has no drama, no spectacle, no moment you could capture in an image. It is a beginning defined by patience, by processes too slow and too uniform to announce themselves. And this challenges the way we think about meaning. We tend to assign meaning to moments we can point to flashes, to turning points. But the universe assigns meaning to duration, to what persists. The Dark Ages lasted far longer than the era of human civilization, far longer than the time stars will continue forming in the future. They were not a mistake. They were the longest uninterrupted condition the universe has ever known. And here is the quiet twist. The universe may be heading back towards something very much like that state. Not the same composition, not the same density, but the same absence of contrast. As stars die and galaxies drift apart, the cosmos will once again enter a phase where nothing new lights up. A future dark age. Not sudden, not catastrophic, just quiet. In that future, space will still exist. Time will still pass, though nothing will mark it. Matter will still be there, spread thin, nearly uniform again. And if someone were there to witness it, they would see nothing change. Not because nothing exists, but because everything has become evenly distributed once more. The universe seems to prefer this state: uniformity, silence, darkness. Light appears only when imbalance grows strong enough to break that stillness, which suggests something unsettling. The luminous universe we inhabit, full of stars, colors, explosions, and signals, may be the anomaly, a brief deviation from a much deeper pattern, a moment where the universe experimented with visibility. And if that is true, then the question shifts. Instead of asking why the universe was dark at first, we might need to ask why it became bright at all. What caused that long, quiet, uniform darkness? to finally break its silence and allow the first sparks of light to interrupt it? Light feels fundamental to us because it follows us everywhere we look. We wake by it. We measure by it. We define distance, speed, age, and truth through its behavior. But the universe does not share our dependence. In cosmic terms, light is not a building block. It is a symptom, a result of conditions that happen to be uneven. This is where another quiet misconception takes hold. We imagine light as something that fills space, as if brightness pours into darkness and replaces it. But that is not what light does. Light does not occupy space. It travels through it, and it only travels because something disturbed an otherwise calm state. Every photon begins its life the same way as excess. Excess heat, excess motion, excess energy seeking balance. Light is what energy does when it has nowhere else to go. This immediately places it in a very different category than darkness. Darkness does not emerge from imbalance. It exists when imbalance disappears. Light requires a story. Darkness does not. To produce light, matter must be excited, atoms vibrating, electrons jumping between states, particles colliding, temperatures rising beyond equilibrium. All of that effort just to shine. The moment the effort stops, the light stops. This is why stars burn. They are not sources of permanence. They are engines fighting collapse by converting mass into radiation. Every second a star shines, it loses something it can never recover. Light is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of expenditure. This reframes how we should think about brightness. A glowing object is not stable. It is leaking. Stars glow because they are dying slowly. Their brilliance is not a feature of longevity, but a phase of loss. Darkness, by contrast, does not lose itself. It does not exhaust. It does not radiate. It does not need fuel. It simply persists. This is why, on cosmic timescales, light is fleeting. The universe has not been luminous for very long, and it will not remain so for much longer. Star formation had a peak. It is already declining. Galaxies are drifting apart faster than new stars can form. The era of brightness is not expanding, it is thinning. And yet, our stories still place light at the center. We talk about the universe lighting up, as if that were the natural climax of existence. But if light is merely a byproduct of imbalance, then its appearance marks not a beginning, but a disturbance, a ripple. Imagine a perfectly calm lake, no waves, no reflections broken. Now imagine tossing stones into it. Each splash creates motion, noise, and patterns of light dancing on the surface. But the lake itself does not depend on the splashes to exist. When the stones stop, the water settles. The stillness was not created by the absence of disturbance. It was there all along. The universe behaves in much the same way. Light is what happens when conditions are thrown out of balance. Darkness is what remains when balance is restored. This is why darkness does not need to arrive. It does not invade. It does not spread. It simply becomes noticeable again when light fades. We often speak of the universe growing darker in the future, but that phrasing is misleading. Darkness is not increasing. Brightness is decreasing. This distinction is subtle, but it matters deeply, because it tells us that the universe is not moving toward decay. It is moving toward rest. Entropy does not mean destruction. It means equalization. Energy spreads out. Temperature differences smooth over. Motion becomes less directed. Light, which thrives on difference, cannot survive this process. It requires contrast. Darkness does not. And here is where the idea becomes difficult to ignore. If light depends on conditions that cannot last forever, and darkness depends on nothing, then darkness is not the opposite of existence. It's existence without emphasis, without punctuation, without drama. Light, then, is punctuation. It marks moments, it highlights features, it tells stories. But punctuation is not language itself. It is added later. The universe does not need light to exist. It needs light to be legible. And legibility is a privilege, not a requirement. Consider this carefully. Most of the universe is not currently shining. Most of it never did. Most of it never will. And yet, gravity still operates there. Time still passes there. Space still stretches there. Reality does not pause when no one is watching. The universe does not wait to be illuminated. This undermines another assumption we rarely question. We tend to think of light as revealing what is already there. But light does more than reveal. It alters. Photons push on matter. Radiation heats, ionizes, strips electrons away. Light reshapes the environments it passes through. In that sense, light is invasive. Darkness is neutral. The earliest universe did not need to be altered to exist. It did not require illumination to function. Only later did light begin to interfere. And that interference created complexity. Stars, galaxies, chemistry, eventually, biology. All of it depends on light, not because light is fundamental, but because light creates gradients, differences in energy, differences in temperature, differences that systems can exploit. Life itself is built on imbalance. It feeds on differences and collapses when those differences disappear, which means life, like light, is temporary by design. Darkness does not host such complexity. But complexity is not a measure of importance. It is a measure of instability. The more complex a system is, the more energy it requires to maintain itself. The universe does not favor complexity in the long run. It tolerates it briefly. This leads to a profound inversion of perspective. Instead of viewing darkness as the absence of something valuable, we might see light as the presence of something costly, something that cannot be sustained forever. Brightness demands constant effort. Silence does not. This is why, when stars die, they do not leave behind more light. They leave behind remnants, cold, dense objects that no longer radiate. White dwarfs cool. Neutron stars dim. Black holes emit almost nothing at all. The universe keeps shedding its luminous features, not because something is going wrong, but because something is finishing. The universe is not broken when it goes dark. It is completed. And yet, we resist this idea. We cling to light as if it were synonymous with meaning, as if darkness were a failure state. But meaning is a human concern. The universe has no obligation to remain interesting. It does not need to perform. It only needs to remain consistent. And consistency favors darkness. This is why the future of the universe is often described as cold, dark, and empty. But empty is the wrong word. Uniform is closer. In that future, matter will still exist. Space will still exist. Time may still exist, though nothing will mark it. What will be missing is emphasis. No bright points. No gradients strong enough to exploit. No structures dramatic enough to notice. The universe will not end. It will level out, which suggests something unsettling about the present moment. We are living during an era when imbalance is still abundant, when light still leaks freely into space, when stars still burn and galaxies still collide. This is not the default condition. It is a temporary window, a brief interval where the universe is expressive. And like all expressions, it fades. This does not make it meaningless. It makes it rare, and rarity is not permanence. The universe may be ancient beyond comprehension, but its luminous phase is fleeting, which brings us back to the deeper question. If light is not fundamental, if it is only a reaction to imbalance, then the true story of the universe is not written in brightness. It is written in what remains when brightness is gone, in the steady, unremarkable persistence of space itself, in the quiet endurance of darkness. And if that is the case, then perhaps the most important state of the universe is not the one we can see. It is the one that exists when nothing demands attention. Nothing needs to be highlighted, when everything is simply there. So the question shifts again. If light is only a temporary disturbance, and darkness is the underlying condition, then what happens when the universe finally runs out of reasons to glow? What kind of reality remains when the last imbalance has evened out, and the universe no longer needs to speak in light at all? The universe does not rush toward its future. It drifts. There is no countdown, No approaching moment where a final switch is flipped and everything suddenly goes dark. What lies ahead is not an ending in the dramatic sense we are used to imagining. It is a thinning, a slow dilution of difference. To understand this, we need to let go of the idea that darkness arrives at the end of cosmic history. Darkness does not move. It does not advance. It does not conquer. What changes is light. Light grows tired. Every luminous structure in the universe exists because energy is concentrated unevenly. A star shines because its core is hotter than its surroundings. A galaxy glows because billions of such imbalances persist at once. But imbalance is fragile. Over time, gravity spreads matter thinner. Expansion stretches space wider. Energy disperses. The universe is not collapsing into darkness. It is relaxing into it. This process has already begun. Star formation peaked billions of years ago. The universe was once far more efficient at turning gas into light. Today, fewer stars are born than die. Each generation burns brighter and faster, leaving behind less fuel for the next. The cosmos is not building toward greater brilliance. It is winding down. Yet this winding down does not resemble decay as we imagine it. There are no ruins, no debris fields marking catastrophe. There is only absence of renewal. The sky grows quieter not because stars are destroyed violently, but because fewer are being made. The universe is not losing something it once depended on. It is letting go of something it no longer needs. This distinction matters because it tells us that darkness is not the opposite of order. It is the absence of emphasis. As time stretches forward, galaxies move beyond each other's reach, not by speeding up dramatically, but because space itself expands between them. Light emitted today from distant galaxies will never reach us, not because it is blocked, but because the distance it must cross grows faster than it can travel. Those galaxies do not vanish. They simply slip beyond connection. Isolation increases. Each region of space becomes more alone. This isolation has a consequence. Without interaction, there is no exchange of energy. Without exchange, there is no gradient. Without gradient, there is no light. The universe is not dimming uniformly. It is fragmenting into quiet pockets, each carrying less and less capacity to glow. Eventually, even the longest-lived stars will exhaust their fuel. Red dwarfs, which burn slowly and steadily, will outlast all others. They will shine faintly for trillions of years, but even they will fade. Not suddenly, not violently. They will cool. They will darken. They will settle into states where nuclear reactions can no longer continue. When that happens, the universe will still be full of objects, white dwarfs, neutron stars, black holes, but almost none of them will emit light. And yet, nothing will have ended. Space will remain. Time will remain. Gravity will remain. What will be missing is activity loud enough to be noticed. This future is often called the heat death of the universe, but that name is misleading. Nothing dies. It's bland. There is no final breath, no collapse into nothingness. There is only thermal equilibrium, a state where everything has the same temperature, where energy differences are too small to drive processes, where nothing stands out. In that state, darkness is not imposed. It is revealed. The universe does not become dark because something removes light. It becomes dark because nothing produces it anymore. And here is where a subtle inversion takes place. We tend to think of light as something the universe produces by default, and darkness as what happens when production stops. But the opposite may be closer to the truth. The universe does not produce light by default. It produces darkness. It appears only when conditions allow it to deviate briefly from that baseline. In this view, the luminous era of the universe is not its destiny. It is its exception. A narrow window where imbalance is high enough to create complexity, structure, and visibility. A window that will close not because of failure, but because balance always wins. This makes the present moment extraordinary, not because it is permanent, but because it is fleeting. We live during a time when the universe is expressive, when it has not yet settled, when it still has energy differences large enough to power stars, chemistry, and thought. But expressiveness is not stability. It is expenditure. Every structure that glows is burning through stored order, and the universe does not replenish order indefinitely. It redistributes it, which means the universe is not running toward an ending. It is returning to its default, a state where nothing insists on being seen, a state where no region demands attention over another, a state where existence is quiet, uniform, and persistent. This is not an apocalypse. It is a normalization, and once again, this challenges our instincts. We are drawn to drama, to beginnings and endings, to peaks and collapses. But the universe does not share our taste for narrative. Its most enduring condition is not action, but stillness, not brightness, but darkness, not change, but consistency, which leads to a thought that feels almost unsettling in its calm. Perhaps darkness is not what happens when the universe runs out of time. Perhaps it is what the universe looks like when time has nothing left to do. In such a state, there are no events to mark moments, no transitions to distinguish one era from another. Time may still exist, but without clocks, without change, time becomes meaningless. Not because it is stopped, but because nothing uses it. This is difficult to imagine because our experience of time is inseparable from change. We feel time because things happen, but a universe without events would still exist, even if no one could tell one moment from the next. Darkness, then, is not just the absence of light, it is the absence of narrative. It is reality without punctuation, and this raises a deeper question. If the universe naturally moves toward a state without events, without emphasis, without contrast, then what does it mean that we exist now? We are not living at the beginning of cosmic history. We are not living at the end. We are living in the middle of an interruption, a brief departure from uniformity, a moment when the universe is loud enough to be noticed. This does not make us central. It makes us temporary. But temporary does not mean insignificant. It means contingent. Our existence depends on conditions that will not last forever, and that dependence ties us intimately to light. We are creatures of imbalance. Our bodies run on energy differences. Our thoughts arise from gradients. Our awareness depends on signals moving from one state to another. We cannot exist in a universe at rest. Darkness, in its deepest sense, is not hospitable to complexity. It does not support structures that feed on difference. But that does not make it lesser. It makes it stable. The universe does not prefer life. It tolerates it briefly. It does not aim for consciousness. It allows it temporarily, which means consciousness is not the goal of the universe. It is a side effect of imbalance, just like light. And side effects do not last. They appear, flourish, and fade. The universe remains. This realization can feel unsettling, even bleak, but it does not have to be, because it reframes our place in a gentler way. We are not witnesses to an ending. We are participants in a rare moment of expression, a moment when the universe has enough energy difference left to generate beauty, complexity, and awareness. And that awareness allows us to notice something profound. The universe does not need to be bright to exist. But while it is bright, it allows things like us to ask questions, to wonder, to listen, and perhaps that is the quiet purpose of light. Not to define reality, but to make it briefly knowable. As brightness fades over cosmic time, the universe will not lose its existence. It will lose its legibility. When that happens, darkness will not feel like loss to the universe, only to those who depended on light to see. So the future is not a fall into nothingness. It is a settling into a state that was always there, a return to a condition older than stars, older than light, older than stories, a condition where nothing needs to be seen to be real. And with that in mind, another question begins to form. If darkness is the universe at rest, if light is the brief disturbance, then what, exactly, is the role of the structures that interrupt that rest? Why does the universe allow imbalance at all? Why does it permit these temporary flares of complexity before inevitably letting them fade back into silence? Imbalance is not an accident. It is tempting to think of imbalance as a mistake. The universe is slowly correcting a wrinkle that will eventually be smoothed away. But imbalance appears too consistently, too methodically, to be dismissed as a flaw. The universe allows imbalance because imbalance is what lets anything happen. In a perfectly uniform state, nothing changes. No gradients, no motion, no cause and effect. Uniformity is stable, but it is also silent. To break that silence, something must tilt. A region must be slightly denser than another. A pocket of matter must be marginally hotter. A fluctuation must survive long enough to grow. These tiny irregularities were present even in the earliest moments of the universe. Not dramatic disruptions, barely noticeable differences in density and temperature. But gravity is patient. Where matter was slightly denser, gravity pulled a little harder. Where it pulled harder, more matter gathered. Where more matter gathered, imbalance increased. And imbalance feeds on itself. This is how structure emerges, not by design, but by amplification. The universe does not plan complexity. It permits it, and permission is enough. Light appears at the tipping point of this process. When imbalance becomes extreme enough, when matter compresses, heats, and accelerates, energy has no choice but to escape. It escapes as radiation. Light is not invited. It is expelled. This is why light is always associated with stress. Stars shine because gravity is squeezing them. Galaxies glow because motion and collision excite their contents. Explosions blaze because systems fail to contain their own energy. Brightness is the sound of imbalance straining against itself. Darkness, by contrast, is what remains when strain disappears. This framing reveals something subtle. The universe does not allow imbalance forever. It allows it just long enough for it to exhaust itself. Gravity gathers matter into stars, but stars burn fuel. Stars enrich space with heavier elements, but that enrichment spreads out. Complexity grows, but complexity increases entropy. Each step forward carries the seeds of its own dissolution. The universe is not cruel in this process. It is impartial. Imbalance is not punished. It is spent. And once it is spent, nothing replaces it. This is why complexity appears in waves. First, simple particles, then atoms, then stars, then galaxies, then chemistry, then life. Each layer builds on gradients left behind by the previous one, and each layer consumes those gradients. By the time life appears, it is feeding on the leftovers of stellar imbalance, chemical energy stored in molecular bonds, sunlight generated by nuclear fusion, heat differences maintained by planetary systems. Life is not a primary phenomenon. It is a late-stage consumer, which means life is exquisitely fragile. Not because it is poorly designed, but because it depends on conditions that are already in decline. The universe does not regenerate gradients once they are flattened. It does not reset. It moves forward by evening out differences. This leads to a realization that quietly reshapes our understanding of time. Time does not flow because events happen. Events happen because time allows imbalance to unwind. In a perfectly balanced universe, time would still exist, but nothing would mark it. Change is not time's cause. It is time's consequence. The arrow of time points in the direction of flattening, from difference to sameness, from contrast to uniformity, from light to darkness. And yet, the universe did not resist imbalance at the beginning. It tolerated it, even needed it, because without imbalance, there would be no path from uniformity to anything else. The earliest universe may have been nearly featureless, but not perfectly so. Those tiny imperfections were enough. Enough to seed stars, enough to seed light, enough to seed complexity. But seeds are not permanent. They grow, mature, and eventually deplete the soil that sustains them. This brings us to an uncomfortable thought. The universe is not trying to preserve complexity. It is allowing it to burn through itself. Complexity is not the goal. It is a transient pattern, a pattern that exists only while energy differences remain steep enough to support it. Once those differences soften, complexity dissolves, not violently, gracefully. Light fades, reactions slow, structures unravel into simpler states. This is not collapse, it is relaxation. The universe is not falling apart, It is letting go. And this sheds new light, or perhaps removes it from the way we think about progress. From a human perspective, complexity feels like advancement. More structure, more information, more capability. But the universe does not evaluate outcomes. It does not care whether a later state feels higher or lower than an earlier one. It only follows physical necessity. Energy spreads, gradients flatten, imbalance resolves. Darkness is not the enemy of this process. It is its destination. Not because darkness is preferred, but because darkness requires nothing extra to persist. Light requires constant imbalance. Darkness persists when imbalance runs out. This makes darkness the most economical state of reality. It costs nothing. It does not leak energy. It does not require maintenance. It does not fight entropy. It is what remains when all struggles have finished. Seen this way, the universe is not on a tragic trajectory. It is on a minimalist one. It sheds complexity as soon as complexity becomes unsustainable. It allows brilliance briefly, then releases it. And that release is not loss, it is completion. This perspective changes how we might understand meaning. Meaning, like light, thrives on difference. We care because things could be otherwise. We choose because outcomes diverge. We notice because something stands out. In a perfectly uniform universe, meaning would not vanish, it would be unnecessary. There would be nothing to prefer, nothing to avoid, nothing to distinguish. Meaning is a property of imbalance. So is awareness. Consciousness itself depends on gradients, electrical differences, chemical flows, signaling asymmetries. When those differences fade, consciousness cannot persist. This does not make consciousness trivial. It makes it rare. And rarity gives it its weight. We exist during a narrow window when the universe still has enough imbalance to sustain thought. We are not witnesses to the universe's purpose. We are expressions of its temporary unevenness, which means the universe did not create light for us. It created conditions where light could happen, and we happened within that light. The universe does not center us. It briefly accommodates us, and accommodation is not commitment. Eventually, the universe will no longer support the gradients that make minds possible. Not because something goes wrong, but because everything finishes what it starts. Stars finish burning. Galaxies finish interacting. Matter finishes clumping. Darkness does not rush in afterward. It simply remains when nothing else needs to happen. This leads to a final inversion that is difficult to ignore. We tend to imagine darkness as the outcome of failure. But perhaps darkness is the outcome of success. The universe succeeded in exploring imbalance. It succeeded in generating structure. It succeeded in producing complexity. And once that exploration is complete, it returns to rest. Not as a punishment, as a resolution. Darkness is not the absence of history. It is history, having finished speaking. And if that is true, then the luminous era of the universe, the era of stars, life, and thought, is not its final statement. It is a parenthesis, a beautiful, temporary deviation from a much deeper stillness. Which brings us to a question that feels almost uncomfortably intimate. The universe allows imbalance only briefly. If it permits light and complexity only for a moment, then why did it allow this moment? Why did it allow conditions precise enough for stars, chemistry, and awareness to arise at all? What is it about imbalance that the universe seems compelled to explore before letting everything finally return to the quiet, ancient, effortless state of darkness that was there long before light and will remain long after it fades? There is a reason the universe does not shine everywhere. Not a technical reason, not a limitation of physics, a structural one. To understand it, we have to confront a strange imbalance at the heart of everything we see. Most of the universe does not interact with light at all. It bends space. It shapes galaxies. It determines how stars move and how clusters hold together. Yet it neither glows nor reflects. This unseen majority is not hiding in shadows. It is simply indifferent to illumination. What we call dark matter is not dark because it absorbs light. It is dark because light ignores it, and it ignores light in return. This is where darkness stops being a metaphor and becomes architecture. Galaxies do not form the way we imagine. They are not built from light outward. They are scaffolded by something invisible first. Long before stars ignite, before gas collapses into luminous disks, there is a structure already in place, a gravitational skeleton made of matter that will never shine. Dark matter gathers early. It clumps faster than ordinary matter. It does not collide, does not radiate, does not lose energy. It simply settles, and everything else follows. Stars form inside these invisible wells. Galaxies spin within halos of darkness. Light traces patterns that were already drawn without it. This overturns another quiet assumption. We tend to believe that light reveals structure, but in the universe, structure often exists before it is revealed. Light does not design the cosmos, it decorates it. Dark matter does not compete with light. It makes light possible without ever participating. This is a profound inversion. The brightest objects in the universe are not the ones doing the organizing. They are the ones being organized. The architecture of reality is largely invisible, which means darkness is not peripheral, it is foundational. If all luminous matter vanished tomorrow, every star, every nebula, every glowing filament, the large-scale structure of the universe would remain almost unchanged. Galaxies would still orbit unseen centers. Clusters would still curve space. Gravitational patterns would persist. The universe would not collapse. It would simply become honest. What we see now is a highlighted version of a much deeper framework. Light is not the frame, it is the paint. And paint fades. Dark matter does not. It does not burn fuel. It does not cool by radiating energy. It does not age in the way luminous matter does. It is patient, which is why it dominates. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the universe's most important structures are built from something that never shines, if light is optional to the architecture of reality, then why do we still place brightness at the center of our understanding? Because light is what talks to us. It carries information. It delivers signals. It announces events. Dark matter does none of that. It shapes reality silently. And silence is easy to overlook. But silence is not absence. Silence is stability. Dark matter does not tell stories. It does not explode. It does not flicker or flare. It holds. It anchors. It keeps. This is why galaxies rotate faster than visible matter alone would allow. Why clusters remain bound when light says they should fall apart. Something unseen is holding everything together, and it does so without emitting a single photon. Darkness, here, is not an ending. It is infrastructure. This force is a subtle but profound realization. The universe's brightest era, the era of stars and galaxies, is built atop a foundation that does not participate in brightness at all. Light is a guest. Darkness is the host, which means the universe is not gradually becoming darker because darkness is winning. It was always dark at its core. Brightness was layered on temporarily. Now, in the most luminous regions, darkness outweighs light by a factor of 5 or more. Most of the mass in a galaxy is invisible. Most of the gravity comes from what does not shine. We live in a universe where visibility is the exception, and that exception defines our perspective. This is why our cosmic stories feel skewed. We narrate what we can see. We prioritize what announces itself, but the universe does not prioritize narration. It prioritizes coherence. Dark matter provides coherence. Light provides commentary, and commentary is never permanent. As stars age and die, their light fades. As galaxies drift apart, their glow thins. But the underlying gravitational framework remains. Long after the universe stops shining, its structure will still exist, not changing, not expressing, just being. This leads to an unsettling but clarifying thought. Perhaps darkness is not what remains after complexity ends. Perhaps complexity is what briefly appears within darkness, a temporary articulation of a deeper, quieter order. Dark matter shows us that darkness is not passive. It shapes outcomes without ever appearing in them. It defines trajectories without announcing decisions. It is presence without performance. And that quality may be the most ancient one of all. If the earliest universe was dark because light had not yet learned how to exist, and the far future will be dark because light can no longer be sustained, then dark matter represents something even more fundamental, a form of darkness that never needed light in the first place. A substance or condition that does not participate in illumination at all. This suggests that darkness is not a single thing. There are layers to it. Some darkness is the absence of emission. Some darkness is the result of distance. Some darkness is the refusal to interact. Dark matter belongs to the last category. It is not hidden. It is uninterested. And that indifference may be the key. Because the universe is not built around what seeks attention. It is built around what persists. Light seeks interaction. It scatters, reflects, absorbs, informs. Dark matter does none of this, and that makes it stable. The universe seems to reward stability over expressiveness. Structures that do not leak energy last longer. Forms that do not announce themselves endure, which may explain why the universe trends toward darkness over time. Not because darkness is preferred, but because darkness is efficient. It costs nothing. Light costs everything. This reframes the idea of cosmic evolution. The universe is not evolving toward complexity as a goal. It is passing through complexity on the way back to simplicity. Dark matter does not participate in that passage. It simply remains, holding space together while everything else comes and goes. This raises a question that is both scientific and philosophical. If the universe is fundamentally structured by something that never shines, if its deepest framework is invisible and silent, then what does it mean that we, as conscious beings, rely entirely on light to understand reality? We see the decorations, not the beams. We hear the echoes, not the walls. Our entire perception is built on the most temporary layer of existence, which means our understanding is biased toward what will not last. We understand the universe through its symptoms, not its skeleton, and that realization invites a quieter way of thinking. Perhaps the most ancient truth of the universe is not found in explosions, beginnings, or luminous displays. Perhaps it is found in what never needed to announce itself at all, in the unseen structures that hold everything together without ever being noticed, in the darkness that does not rush, does not fade, does not speak, a darkness that was there before light arrived, a darkness that will remain when light is gone. And if that is true, then the question shifts again. If darkness can shape reality without interacting, if it can define structure without expression, then what other forces might exist that never announce themselves, but quietly determine the fate of everything we see? What else might be shaping the universe right now, without ever shining a light on itself? Darkness does not only hold the universe together, it pushes it apart. This is where the story becomes more unsettling and quieter. If dark matter is the skeleton, then something else is the pressure in the bones. A force that does not clump, does not settle, does not anchor. Instead, it stretches. The universe is not merely expanding because it began that way. It is expanding because something continues to urge it outward, and that something does not shine. What we call dark energy is not a substance you could point to. It does not gather into halos. It does not form structures. It fills space itself. Everywhere there is space, there is dark energy. Not concentrated, not localized, uniform. This uniformity is the key. Dark energy does not act like gravity. It does not pull things together. It does the opposite. It makes space want more space. As the universe expands, there is more space and therefore more dark energy, which accelerates the expansion even further. This is not an explosion. It is a preference. Space prefers to stretch, and the more it stretches, the more strongly it continues to do so. This is one of the strangest discoveries in modern cosmology. The universe is not slowing down as it expands. It is speeding up, Not because something is pushing from the edges, there are no edges, but because the fabric of space itself is relaxing outward. This reveals a different face of darkness. Dark matter holes. Dark energy releases. One builds structure, the other dissolves connection. Together, they shape the fate of everything luminous. Light cannot fight either. Photons move at the maximum speed allowed by the universe, but even that is not enough to overcome accelerating expansion. There are regions of the cosmos already beyond causal contact with us, places whose light will never reach Earth, not now, not ever. Those galaxies still exist, they still shine, but they are gone from us forever. Dark energy did not destroy them. It simply made the distance between us grow faster than light can travel. Separation without violence. This introduces a new kind of darkness. Not the darkness of absence, not the darkness of silence, but the darkness of permanent disconnection. As expansion accelerates, the universe does not become uniformly dark all at once. It becomes fragmented. Islands of matter drift apart, each surrounded by growing emptiness. Over time, each island becomes alone. In the far future, observers, if any still exist, will see fewer and fewer galaxies in their sky. Eventually, they will see only their own. And after that, perhaps not even that. The universe does not end with a blackout. It ends with isolation. Dark energy does not erase light directly. It removes the ability for light to matter. A photon can still travel. It can still exist. But if it can never reach another object, never be absorbed, never be seen, does it still participate in reality? This question cuts deeper than it first appears, because interaction is how meaning forms. Events matter because they affect something else. Light carries information because it arrives somewhere. A universe where signals never arrive is a universe where events lose consequence. Dark energy is not just expanding space. It is thinning relevance. Over cosmic time, fewer events will have effects beyond their immediate surroundings. The universe becomes locally busy, but globally indifferent. Each island evolves in near complete isolation. Stars live and die without witnesses beyond their own systems. Galaxies age without interacting. Eventually, even within islands, energy differences fade, and darkness deepens, not as a blanket, but as a silence between unreachable worlds. This kind of darkness is different from the primordial one. The earliest darkness was uniform. The future darkness is separated, disconnected regions of quiet, each sealed off by expanding space. Yet the result is similar. Light loses its role as a messenger. Without delivery, information collapses into irrelevance. This challenges a comforting idea we often hold. We like to believe the universe is a shared space, that everything exists within a single, connected reality. But dark energy suggests otherwise. The universe is becoming less of a whole, not by breaking apart, but by losing the ability to remain coherent across distances. Connection is not guaranteed forever. Makes the present era unusual. Right now, the universe is still connected enough for light to travel between distant regions. We can see galaxies billions of light years away. We can reconstruct history from ancient photons. This will not always be possible. Future observers may look out and see an empty sky. Not because the universe is empty, but because connection has ended. Their darkness will be deeper than ours. Not darker in brightness, but darker in information. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is darkness defined by the absence of light, or by the absence of interaction? Dark energy suggests the latter. A region can be filled with glowing stars and still be effectively dark to the rest of the universe, because no signal escapes, no influence spreads. Darkness becomes a boundary condition, not a visual one. This changes how we should think about the fate of complexity. Complex systems rely on exchange, energy exchange, information exchange, material exchange. When isolation increases, complexity suffocates, not because components disappear, but because they can no longer cooperate across scales. Dark energy does not kill complexity directly. It starves it of context. Which brings us back to the deeper theme. Darkness is not one thing. It is a family of conditions where emphasis fades, where visibility, interaction, or relevance dissolves. Dark matter anchors structure without shining. Dark energy dissolves connection without destroying. Both are forms of darkness that do not oppose existence. They redefine it. Light, in this context, is fragile. It depends on proximity, on shared space, on interaction. Darkness does not. Darkness persists whether things touch or not, which means the universe is not just trending toward darkness in the future. It is already dominated by it now. We live in a universe where most mass is dark matter, most influence is dark energy, and most space is unlit. Light is a thin thread woven through a much darker fabric, a temporary articulation. And yet, that thread is enough to produce thought, memory, and awareness, which makes the present moment extraordinary, not because light is powerful, but because it still matters. Signals still arrive. Connections still exist. The universe is still legible. But legibility is fading. As expansion accelerates, fewer pages of the cosmic book can be read. Eventually, the book will still exist, but it will be closed, not destroyed, unreachable. This reframes darkness one more time. Darkness is not the erasure of reality. It is the erasure of access. Reality does not end. It withdraws. And withdrawal is quieter than destruction. No explosions, no collapse. Just distance growing faster than meaning can follow. If the earliest universe was dark because light had not yet learned how to travel, and the far future will be dark because light can no longer arrive, then darkness is not a stage the universe passes through once. It is the condition that surrounds every expressive moment. Before expression, after expression, and increasingly, during it. Which brings us to the next question. If darkness can isolate regions of the universe from one another, if it can quietly erase shared reality without removing existence, then what happens to time itself? When nothing meaningful can travel between events, what does time become? In a universe where nothing can ever reach anything else again, time feels inseparable from change. We measure it by motion, by decay, by cycles of light and shadow. A day passes because the sun rises and sets. A year passes because a planet completes a path. A lifetime passes because bodies age and transform. Without change, time becomes difficult to recognize. And in a universe where darkness increasingly separates everything, change itself begins to lose meaning. Time does not stop in the future darkness, but it becomes unused. As dark energy stretches space and isolates regions from one another, events still occur locally. Stars may still burn, particles may still move, processes may still unfold, but those events no longer ripple outward. They do not influence distant regions. They do not synchronize. They do not build a shared history. Time fragments. Each isolated pocket of the universe begins to carry its own private clock. Without connection, there is no universal now, end quote. The idea of a cosmic present dissolves. This is already happening, slowly. Even today, two distant galaxies do not share a common timeline in any practical sense. Signals between them take billions of years to arrive, if they arrive at all. In the far future, no signal will ever bridge those gaps again. Events will occur, but they will not be witnessed beyond their immediate surroundings. Time will still pass, but it will not accumulate meaning across space. This is a subtle but profound shift. Time, as we experience it, is not just duration, it is coordination. Moments matter because they relate to other moments. Causes matter because they produce effects elsewhere. In a disconnected universe, causality becomes local. Nothing echoes, nothing propagates. Time still exists mathematically, but it loses its narrative power. There is no longer a story that spans the universe, only isolated paragraphs. This brings us to an unsettling realization. Time may not be a fundamental feature of reality in the way we imagine. It may be an emergent property of connection. When regions interact, time links them into sequences. When interaction fades, time loses its grip. In perfect darkness, where nothing exchanges information, time has nothing to organize. Moments exist, but they do not relate. This echoes the earliest universe. Before light could travel freely, before structures created long-range influence, the universe may have existed in a state where time was real but meaningless. Change occurred, but nothing marked it. No clocks, no observers, no memory. Time was present, but unused. Darkness, then, is not timeless. It is time without reference. This challenges our deepest intuition. We tend to imagine darkness as something that happens within time, night following day, endings following beginnings. But cosmic darkness does something stranger. It strips time of contrast. Without contrast, there is no rhythm. Without rhythm, time becomes flat. A moment does not stand out from the next, not because nothing happens, but because nothing accumulates. This is why the far future of the universe is so difficult to imagine. Not because it is violent or chaotic, but because it is monotonous. Uniformity erases landmarks. In such a universe, asking when becomes meaningless. When compared to what? This reframes darkness yet again. Darkness is not only the absence of light or interaction, it is the absence of temporal structure. A universe can exist, evolve, and persist, and still feel timeless, not frozen, just unmarked. And here is where the idea becomes intimate. Our sense of time is deeply tied to light. We evolved under a star. Our biology is synchronized to cycles of illumination. We feel time passing because light changes. Remove light, and time becomes difficult to feel. This is why deep darkness distorts our perception. Minutes stretch, hours collapse. The mind loses its anchors. The universe, on a cosmic scale, is heading toward that condition, a state where nothing external marks the passage of moments. This does not mean the universe ends. It means the universe stops telling time. And if time loses its narrative function, then history itself dissolves. Events still happen, but they leave no lasting imprint beyond their local region. No memory spreads. No record survives. The universe becomes forgetful, not because it erases the past, but because the past cannot reach the future. This raises a question that feels almost philosophical. Is time something the universe experiences, or something that emerges only when events are connected? If darkness isolates everything, time becomes private. And private time is indistinguishable from no time at all. This perspective suggests that the luminous era of the universe, the era when light travels, information spreads, and events echo, is also the era when time feels real. Not because time began then, but because it became usable. Usable by matter, usable by life, usable by memory. When darkness reasserts itself, time does not vanish. It simply stops mattering, which leads to a quieter thought. Perhaps the universe did not begin with time in the way we understand it. Perhaps time became meaningful only when light made the universe communicative. Perhaps it will lose that meaning again when communication fades. Darkness, in this sense, is not an enemy of time. It is time without storytelling. This changes how we should think about our place. We exist during a rare interval when the universe is not only luminous, but synchronized. When signals cross vast distances, when history can be shared, our memories are not just personal. They are cosmically possible. But that possibility is temporary. Eventually, the universe will still exist, but it will no longer remember itself. Not because it forgets, but because memory cannot travel. Darkness does not erase reality. It erases continuity. And continuity is what makes time feel alive. Which brings us to the next question. If darkness dissolves shared time, if the universe becomes a collection of isolated moments, then what happens to existence itself? When nothing can ever be part of a larger story again? What does it mean to be in a universe where nothing can ever be remembered beyond itself? Existence does not vanish when stories end. That idea feels counterintuitive to us because we live inside narratives. We remember, we anticipate, we connect moments into meaning. But the universe does not require meaning to exist. When darkness dissolves shared time, when events no longer echo, when memory cannot travel, existence does not collapse. It simplifies. In a disconnected universe, things still are. They simply are not part of anything larger. This is difficult to accept because we equate existence with participation. To exist, in human terms, is to affect and be affected, to leave traces, to matter beyond oneself. But the universe does not measure existence that way. A particle drifting alone in empty space still exists. A cold remnant star still exists. A region of space with no observers still exists. Existence does not depend on witnesses. It depends on persistence. Darkness reveals this truth with unsettling clarity. When light can no longer travel, when information cannot spread, when nothing links one region to another, reality does not disappear. It becomes local. Each isolated pocket of the universe becomes complete unto itself. Nothing outside matters, because nothing outside can ever arrive. This does not produce chaos. It produces stillness. Without interaction, there is no conflict. Without exchange, there is no escalation. Without connection, there is no comparison. Things do not strive to become anything else. They simply remain until internal processes exhaust themselves. This is why the far future of the universe is often misunderstood. It is not a wasteland of ruins. It is not a graveyard. It is a collection of quiet endpoints. Each region settles into a state where nothing new can happen, not because time stops, but because nothing can trigger change. Change requires difference. Difference requires interaction. Darkness removes interaction without destroying substance. In this way, darkness does something subtle. It strips existence of ambition. Stars do not try to shine. Galaxies do not try to grow. Matter does not try to organize. Those impulses belong to eras of imbalance. In equilibrium, nothing pushes. The universe does not want to do anything. It simply is. This leads to a thought that feels almost taboo. Perhaps existence does not need purpose. Purpose is something that emerges when systems compete, compare, and persist unevenly. In a universe at rest, purpose becomes irrelevant. Not wrong, just unnecessary. This does not mean such a universe is empty or meaningless. It means meaning is not a universal requirement. Meaning is local, temporary, context-dependent. Just like light, darkness does not destroy meaning. It reveals that meaning was never fundamental. It was a feature of connection, and connection is not permanent. This perspective reframes what it means to end. And 14. We imagine endings as moments of loss, when something that mattered ceases to be. But the universe's quiet future is not defined by loss. It is defined by completion. Processes finish what they began. Gradients flatten. Structures relax. There is no unfinished business. This is not tragedy. It is resolution without applause, which brings us to a deeply uncomfortable realization. The universe can exist without stories, if it can persist without memory, if it can remain real without observers, then perhaps our presence is not required for reality to justify itself. We are not the reason the universe exists. We are something the universe briefly allows. This can feel diminishing, but it can also feel liberating, because it removes pressure. The universe does not demand that we matter forever. It does not require us to leave a permanent mark. It does not expect continuity. Existence is not a performance. It does not need to be witnessed to be valid. This reframes darkness one more time. Darkness is not the erasure of being. It is being without expectation, without the need to be noticed, without the need to be remembered. This is why darkness feels ancient. It predates narrative. Before there were events to connect, before there were observers to care, before there were structures to interpret, there was existence without commentary. Darkness is existence before interpretation, and existence after interpretation fades, which suggests that the luminous era of the universe, the era of stars, minds, stories, is not the default condition. It is a temporary amplification, a phase where reality becomes expressive enough to be aware of itself, not because awareness is required, but because conditions briefly permit it. When those conditions fade, awareness fades too. Not abruptly, gently, as signals weaken, as connections break, as memory loses reach. Darkness does not extinguish consciousness violently. It makes consciousness unsustainable. And yet, the universe does not mourn this. Mourning is a function of memory. The universe does not remember in the way we do. It does not cling. It does not regret. It allows, and then it releases. This leads to a quiet, unsettling conclusion. The universe is not built around permanence. It is built around allowance. Things exist as long as conditions permit. When conditions change, existence continues, but expression changes with it. Darkness is not a failure state. It is a state without expression, which means the far future of the universe is not empty. It is silent. Not silent because nothing is there, silent because nothing needs to speak. And that silence is not waiting to be broken. It is complete. This shifts the question one last time. If existence does not require meaning, if reality does not depend on being remembered, if the universe can persist without stories, then why does expression appear at all? Why does the universe ever become bright, complex, and aware if darkness is sufficient? What is it about imbalance that allows reality, even briefly, to look at itself before returning to a state where looking no longer matters? There is a moment in every complex system when effort becomes unnecessary, not because the system has failed, but because it has finished doing what it could. This moment is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with collapse or spectacle. It arrives as rest. The universe has been moving toward that moment since the very beginning. Not rushing, not resisting, just unfolding imbalance, then letting it go. In physics, this state has many names: thermal equilibrium, minimum energy, maximum entropy. But none of those names capture what it feels like. They describe outcomes, not conditions. What they point to is something simpler, a state where nothing needs to change. Darkness, in its deepest sense, is not the absence of activity. It is the absence of necessity. When gradients disappear, there is nothing left to drive motion. No pressure differences, no temperature contrasts, no chemical tensions. Nothing is trying to become something else. This is why darkness is often misunderstood. We associate stillness with stagnation. We associate rest with failure. But in the universe, rest is not collapse. It is completion. Every star that shines is doing work. Every galaxy that collides is releasing stored tension. Every complex structure is spending imbalance. Darkness is what remains when there is nothing left to spend. Not because something was taken away, but because everything that could happen already has. This reframes the idea of an end was 1-9. The universe does not end the way stories end. There is no final scene, concluding moment where everything stops at once. Instead, processes simply stop needing to continue. One by one, gradients flatten, reactions slow, interactions thin out. Eventually, nothing requires effort anymore. And when nothing requires effort, nothing produces light. Darkness is the visible signature of that condition. Not empty, not dead, finished. This idea becomes clearer when we look at what survives the longest. The most enduring objects in the universe are not the brightest ones. They are the quiet remnants. White dwarfs, slowly cooling over trillions of years. Neutron stars, dense and inert. Black holes, almost entirely silent. These are not failures of stellar evolution. They are its final, stable products. They do not shine because they no longer need to. They are matter at rest. Even black holes, often imagined as violent, are remarkably calm on cosmic timescales. They do not glow. They do not radiate significantly. They simply persist. Eventually, even they will fade. Through processes so slow that event is the wrong word. Quantum leakage, Hawking radiation, and evaporation that takes longer than the current age of the universe, multiplied by numbers that strain comprehension. This is not destruction. It is the universe gently letting go of concentration. Darkness, here, is not sudden. It is patient. And patience may be the most ancient property of reality. Before stars, before light, before structure, the universe waited. Not consciously, not intentionally, but structurally. It existed in a condition where nothing demanded urgency. And after all complexity has unwound, it returns to that condition again. This suggests something profound. Darkness is not what interrupts existence. It is what contains it. Like silence contains music. Like rest contains effort. Like sleep contains wakefulness. We fear darkness because we associate it with loss. But loss implies something missing that should be there. The universe does not share that judgment. When light fades, nothing essential is missing. Something optional has ended. This is difficult to accept because our entire experience is built on option. We live in the phase where things can happen, where choices exist, where futures branch. But branching is not eternal. Eventually, there are no alternatives left, only what is. And what is does not need to be bright. In fact, brightness becomes wasteful in such a state. Light is energy escaping. Darkness is energy conserved. The universe, over time, favors conservation, not out of preference, out of inevitability, which leads to a thought that feels almost comforting in its neutrality. The universe does not burn itself out. It cools itself down. Cooling is not destruction, it is stabilization. This reframes the idea of cosmic death entirely. There is no death. There is only the end of exertion, the end of striving, the end of imbalance. Darkness is the universe no longer straining to be anything else. And in that sense, darkness is not hostile to existence. It is existence without effort. This brings us back to a subtle distinction we rarely make. Between activity and being, we tend to think something must be active to be real. But reality does not require activity. A stone resting in space is real. A particle at minimum energy is real. A region of space with nothing happening is still space. Darkness is not non-being. It is being without motion, which suggests that the most fundamental state of the universe is not dynamic, it is static. Not frozen in the sense of trapped, but settled. The universe does not seek excitement. Excitement happens when conditions allow. When they no longer allow it, the universe does not protest. It rests. This casts new light, or perhaps removes it from the question of why imbalance existed at all. Perhaps imbalance is not a mistake. Perhaps it is a necessary phase, a way for the universe to explore its own possibilities before settling into what it always returns to, like a breath taken before a long exhale, like wakefulness before sleep. Darkness is not the end of the story. It is the state where storytelling no longer applies, where nothing unfolds because nothing needs to. This can feel unsettling because it removes us from the center. We are not the purpose of the universe, part of a temporary articulation, a phase where the universe is expressive enough to generate awareness within itself. But awareness is not required. It is allowed, and allowances are temporary. This does not make awareness meaningless. It makes it rare, and rarity gives it depth. We exist in a universe that will one day no longer support minds, not because it rejects them, but because it no longer has the gradients that make them possible. Darkness is not anti-consciousness. It is post-consciousness, a state where awareness is no longer necessary for reality to persist. Which brings us to an even quieter realization. Perhaps the universe does not prefer darkness. Perhaps darkness is simply what remains. When preference itself dissolves, when there is no longer enough difference to create desire, motion, or outcome, in that state, the universe does not feel empty. It feels complete. No tension, no striving, no unfinished processes, just existence without urgency. This is why darkness feels ancient. Not because it is old, but because it is what reality looks like, when nothing is pushing it forward anymore. And if that is the case, then the luminous era we inhabit is not a tragedy waiting to end. It is a brief awakening. a moment where the universe is lively enough to ask questions about itself, not because it must, but because, for a short while, it can. And as that ability fades, nothing essential is lost, only expression. Which leads to the next, deeper question. If darkness is the universe at rest, if light and complexity are temporary exertions, then what is rest for? Is rest simply the absence of activity? Or is it the most stable, most honest form of existence the universe ever reaches? And if rest is the destination, what does that say about the meaning of this brief, luminous interval in which we find ourselves now? Rest is not the absence of purpose. It is what remains when purpose is no longer required. We often think of rest as something that follows exhaustion, a pause taken because effort has drained us. But in the universe, rest is not a reaction, it is a destination. Long before there were stars to burn fuel, long before there were galaxies to collide, long before there were minds to wonder, the universe existed in a state where nothing needed to happen. And long after all luminous processes have finished, it will return to a similar condition, not because something went wrong, but because everything that could unfold did. This forces us to confront a difficult idea. Perhaps activity is not the point of existence. Perhaps rest is. This feels unsettling, because our lives are defined by motion. We grow, we strive, we pursue. We measure ourselves by what we do, not by what we allow to remain still. But the universe does not measure itself. It does not keep score. It does not evaluate outcomes. It simply moves through states that are permitted by physical law. And the most permitted state, the one that requires the least justification, is rest. This is why darkness feels inevitable, not because it is imposed, but because nothing resists it forever. Light resists rest. It pushes outward. It escapes. Brightness is energy refusing to stay put. Darkness is energy that no longer needs to go anywhere. In that sense, darkness is not emptiness. It is contentment. Not emotional contentment the universe does not feel, but structural contentment, a configuration where no internal tension remains. This reframes the luminous era of the universe in a subtle way. Stars, galaxies, chemistry, life, all of these are expressions of tension, energy stored in dense configurations, gradually releasing itself. Fusion is tension between gravity and pressure. Chemical bonds are tension between attraction and separation. Life is tension between order and decay. Every structure exists because something is being held out of equilibrium. But equilibrium is patient. It waits. And eventually, every held tension resolves. Darkness is what remains when nothing is being held anymore. This makes darkness feel final. But final does not mean empty. It means finished. We struggle with this because we project our own fears onto the cosmos. For us, rest often feels like stagnation because we are temporary. If we stop moving, we decay. The universe does not decay when it rests. It stabilizes. It does not rot. It settles. The universe does not need to justify its stillness. It does not owe productivity to anything, which leads to a question that feels uncomfortably personal. If rest is the most stable state of existence, and activity is temporary, then what is the role of beings like us, who exist only during the brief interval of activity? We are not designed for rest. Our minds require stimulation. Our bodies require energy flow. Our awareness depends on change. We exist only while the universe is not at rest. We are creatures of the in-between. This does not make us mistakes. It makes us transient. And transience is not failure. It is a condition. We are expressions of a universe that has not yet finished unwinding its tensions. A universe still rich enough in imbalance to allow complexity to bloom. But complexity blooms only once. It does not repeat indefinitely. The universe does not cycle back to high imbalance. It moves in one direction from unevenness to uniformity, which means the era of complexity is not recurring. It is singular. This realization quietly elevates the present moment, not because it is central, but because it is rare. We live in the only era when the universe is complex enough to know itself and unstable enough to care. Darkness does not care, not because it is cruel, but because it has no gradients left to exploit. Caring requires contrast. Desire requires alternatives. Choice requires difference. Darkness erases difference by equalizing everything. In that sense, darkness is not the enemy of meaning. It is the condition where meaning no longer applies. Meaning is a local phenomenon. It emerges where options exist, where outcomes diverge, where futures can branch. In a universe at rest, there are no branches, only persistence. This changes how we might think about the universe's trajectory. Instead of imagining a story that rises, peaks, and falls, we might imagine a long unfolding that briefly becomes articulate. A long silence interrupted by a moment of speech, not because speech was necessary, but because conditions allowed it. Light is the voice of imbalance. Darkness is the silence of resolution. Neither is better. They are different phases of the same process, and that process is not guided by intention. It is guided by possibility. The universe does not choose to become dark. Darkness is what remains when nothing else can happen. This brings us to a deeper layer of the question. If rest is the most stable form of existence, and activity is inherently temporary, then what does that say about the nature of reality itself? Perhaps reality is not fundamentally dynamic. Perhaps motion, change, and expression are surface features. The deep structure may be static. This aligns with something quietly unsettling. At the smallest scales, in quantum theory, systems seek their lowest energy state. Particles drop to ground states. Fields settle into minimum configurations. Motion exists because systems have not yet reached those minima. Darkness, at the largest scale, may simply be the universe's ground state, the condition it naturally falls into when all excitations decay. If this is true, then the bright, complex universe we inhabit is not the default. It is an excited state, a temporary elevation above baseline, and excited states always decay, not out of malice, out of inevitability. This does not diminish the value of the excited state. On the contrary, excited states are where things happen. They are where patterns form, where information flows, where awareness can arise, but they do not last, and perhaps they are not meant to. The universe does not appear to optimize for longevity of complexity. It optimizes for stability, and stability belongs to darkness, which means the universe is not moving toward destruction. It is moving toward its most natural configuration, one that existed before light and will exist after light fades. This realization reframes our emotional response to cosmic darkness. We often fear it because we imagine it as loss. But loss implies deprivation of something essential. Darkness does not deprive the universe of anything it needs. It deprives only those who depended on imbalance to exist. Life, thought, memory, these are not requirements for reality. They are permissions, and permissions are temporary. This does not make them insignificant. It makes them precious. We exist during a brief interval where the universe is not at rest, where gradients still exist, where questions can be asked, where answers can matter. That interval will close, not with catastrophe, with quiet. And quiet is not cruelty. It is completion. This shifts the emotional tone of the entire story. The universe is not marching toward oblivion. It is settling into itself, like a body falling asleep after a long day. Not because it is weak, because it has finished being awake. Darkness is not the absence of existence. It is existence without urgency, without striving, without unfinished business. And if that is true, then perhaps the deepest misunderstanding we carry is not about darkness. It is about activity. We assume that doing is superior to being. The universe disagrees. Being is what remains when doing is no longer possible. Which leads to the next question, one that turns inward. If rest is the universe's most stable state, and activity is a temporary deviation, then what is the role of consciousness? Is awareness merely a byproduct of imbalance? Or does it serve some deeper function? During this brief luminous interval, before the universe returns to its ancient, effortless rest, consciousness does not appear everywhere imbalance exists. Stars are imbalanced. Galaxies are imbalanced. Even storms of particles collide and radiate energy without ever becoming aware of themselves. So imbalance alone is not enough. Consciousness emerges only when imbalance is shaped, delayed, and folded back on itself. It requires not just difference, but difference that can persist long enough to notice itself changing. This makes consciousness an unusual phenomenon, not rare in the sense of unlikely, but rare in the sense of precise. It appears only when conditions are narrow enough to support memory, feedback, and comparison. Light plays a critical role here, not because light is special on its own, but because light is fast, reliable, and able to carry information across space. Light connects moments. It allows past states to influence future ones. It creates continuity. Consciousness feeds on that continuity. Brains are not engines of thought. They are engines of delay. They hold information briefly, compare it to incoming signals, and generate response. This requires gradients that do not collapse immediately. Energy must flow, but not too quickly. Signals must propagate, but not vanish instantly. Consciousness exists only in this narrow window. Too much order, and nothing changes. Too much chaos, and nothing persists. Darkness, in its deepest sense, represents the closing of that window, not because it opposes awareness, but because it removes the conditions awareness depends on. When light fades, information slows. When connections break, memory shrinks. When gradients flatten, comparison becomes impossible. Consciousness does not end with violence. It ends with irrelevance. There is nothing left to notice. This reframes awareness in a way that is both humbling and strangely intimate. Consciousness is not the goal of the universe. It is a temporary configuration, a pattern that forms when imbalance lingers long enough to observe itself. The universe does not seek awareness. It allows it. And allowance is not permanence. This may explain why consciousness feels fragile, why it depends on constant energy input, why it collapses when gradients fade, why it cannot survive in uniform conditions. Consciousness is not built for rest. It is built for transition. It exists only while the universe is still unwinding. This makes consciousness less like a crown of creation and more like a spark thrown off during cooling. Beautiful, brief, unrepeatable. But this does not make it meaningless. Meaning does not require permanence. Meaning arises from contrast. A song does not lose its meaning because it ends. A thought does not lose its weight because it fades. The universe does not preserve consciousness forever, but it allows it to happen at all. That allowance is extraordinary because it means that, for a brief interval, reality becomes capable of reflecting on itself. Endlessly. Not universally, but locally, within small islands of complexity. We are one such island. Our awareness is not central. It is contingent. But contingency does not imply insignificance. It implies timing. We exist at the exact moment when the universe still has enough imbalance to support self-reference. When information can loop, when memory can form, when questions can be asked, that moment will pass. But its passing does not erase the fact that it occurred. The universe does not remember in the way we do, but memory does not require a rememberer to have been real. A moment does not need to be eternal to matter. This leads to a subtle shift in how we might view darkness. Darkness is not the erasure of awareness. It is the condition where awareness is no longer needed, where nothing remains to compare, where nothing remains to reflect upon. In that sense, darkness is not hostile to consciousness. It is post-conscious, a state where reflection has finished, and finished is not the same as failed. This is difficult for us to accept because consciousness defines our identity. To imagine a universe without awareness feels like imagining a universe without value. But value is not a universal property. It is local. It emerges where minds exist. The universe does not carry value intrinsically. It carries structure. and structure does not require awareness to persist, which means awareness is not the measure of reality. It is one of its temporary expressions. This reframes the relationship between consciousness and darkness. Darkness is not what consciousness fears. Consciousness fears irrelevance. But irrelevance is not annihilation. It is simply non-participation. A universe at rest does not negate consciousness. It no longer requires it. And that difference matters, because it removes the tragedy from the story. There is no cosmic punishment, no rejection, just a phase change. Awareness appears. Awareness explores. Awareness fades. Reality remains. This mirrors something deeply familiar. Sleep does not destroy awareness. It suspends it. Rest does not negate existence. It stabilizes it. Darkness is the universe's sleep, not a collapse, a withdrawal, which brings us to a deeper, more unsettling question. If consciousness is a temporary pattern, if awareness exists only while imbalance persists, then what is the universe aware of during this brief interval? Is consciousness merely a side effect, or does it serve as a way for reality to briefly witness its own transformation before settling back into silence? And if so, what is the universe learning in the short moment when it can still ask questions about itself? If the universe is capable of awareness only briefly, then that awareness is not accidental, it is situational. Consciousness does not appear randomly across cosmic history. It emerges at a very specific phase, when the universe is complex enough to generate feedback, but not yet so settled that feedback becomes impossible. That phase is narrow, too early, and there is no structure to host awareness. Too late, and there is no energy left to sustain it. We exist in the middle of that narrow corridor. This suggests that consciousness is not something added to the universe. It is something the universe temporarily becomes when conditions align. Not everywhere, not always, but precisely when imbalance is rich enough and decay is slow enough to allow self-reference. This reframes awareness in a subtle way. Consciousness is not a permanent feature of reality. It is a phase transition, like ice forming at a precise temperature, like vapor condensing when pressure crosses a threshold. When the conditions are right, awareness appears. When they are not, it dissolves. Darkness, in this sense, is not the enemy of consciousness. It is the condition where awareness is no longer thermodynamically allowed. This perspective removes the mysticism, but replaces it with something deeper. Consciousness is lawful. It follows the same rules as stars and galaxies. It requires gradients. It requires flow. It requires time that still has direction. When gradients fade, consciousness fades with them. Not because the universe rejects awareness, but because the universe no longer supports it. This does not diminish awareness. It contextualizes it. A candle flame is not trivial because it goes out. It is meaningful because it burns at all. Awareness is like that flame, a temporary articulation of imbalance. But what does awareness do during that brief articulation? This is where the question becomes unsettling. We tend to assume consciousness exists for us, to help us survive, choose, and adapt. But from a cosmic perspective, that explanation feels incomplete. Survival explains how awareness persists locally, not why it appears at all. From the universe's point of view, consciousness does not improve efficiency. It increases complexity. It accelerates energy use. It creates new gradients that must be resolved. Awareness is expensive, which means the universe is not gaining anything practical from it. So why allow it? Perhaps because awareness is not a tool. Perhaps it is a mirror. When awareness appears, reality gains the ability to experience itself from the inside, not permanently, not globally, but locally and briefly. Consciousness allows the universe to feel the passage of imbalance, to register difference, to notice that things are changing. Without awareness, change still happens, but it is unmarked. With awareness, change becomes experienced. This suggests something subtle. The universe does not need to be observed to exist, but observation changes the character of existence. It introduces interiority, an insight to what was previously only outside. For a brief interval, reality is not just unfolding, it is felt. Darkness, then, is not the absence of experience. It is the absence of interiority. A universe at rest has no inside, no perspective, no reflection, not because it is empty, but because nothing needs to register difference. This reframes the role of consciousness one last time. Awareness is not the point of the universe. It is the universe passing through a state where difference is rich enough to be experienced from within, a moment of inwardness, and moments end. This does not make awareness futile. It makes it singular. There may be no second chance. The universe will not cycle back to this state. It is not oscillating between rest and awareness. It is passing through awareness once, which makes the present moment profound. In a way that does not depend on destiny or purpose. We are not here because the universe planned it. We are here because the universe has not yet finished relaxing. And during that unfinished state, experience becomes possible. This perspective changes how we might think about darkness. Darkness is not what erases experience. It is what remains when experience is no longer necessary, when difference is gone, when there is nothing left to feel. In that state, the universe does not lose something essential. It sheds something optional. This brings us to a difficult emotional crossroads. If awareness is temporary, if experience will not last, if darkness eventually returns as the dominant state, then what gives this luminous interval its weight? Why does it matter that the universe can feel itself for a moment before returning to silence? The answer may lie in something deeply counterintuitive. Meaning does not require endurance. Meaning requires contrast. A brief experience against a long silence can matter more than an endless one. A single note in a quiet room changes the room forever. Even after the sound fades, the universe does not remember. But memory is not the only way significance exists. Significance exists in occurrence. Something happened, and that is irreversible. The universe can return to darkness, but it cannot undo the fact that it once became aware. That awareness does not need to persist, to have been real, which suggests a final, unsettling possibility. Perhaps the deepest role of consciousness is not to survive into the future, but to mark, however briefly, that the universe was once not alone with itself. That reality, for a moment, knew that it was changing. And when darkness returns, it will not be a return to ignorance. It will be a return to rest. After having been awake, this raises the next question, one that sits quietly beneath everything we've explored. If awareness is a phase, and darkness is the resting state, then what happens at the exact boundary between them? What does it feel like when the universe finishes being aware and lets experience finally dissolve back into silence? There is no single moment when awareness ends, no final blink, no definitive cutoff where consciousness switches off across the universe. Instead, awareness thins. It fades unevenly, the same way light does. Some regions lose it early, some sustain it longer, but nowhere does it end all at once. This is the most difficult aspect of the universe's transition back into darkness to grasp. We are wired to expect endings to be sharp. Birth, death, on, off. But the universe does not operate with switches. It operates with gradients, and awareness dissolves the same way it emerges gradually, locally, unevenly. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Stars still shine, planets still orbit. Life still metabolizes energy. Thought still loops back on itself. But beneath the surface, something fundamental begins to erode. The gradients that sustain complexity start to weaken. Not suddenly, not catastrophically, quietly. Star formation slows. Energy sources become less concentrated. Signals travel shorter distances before becoming irrelevant. Awareness depends on more than just energy. It depends on surplus, extra energy beyond what is needed simply to persist. Brains, whether biological or artificial, are extravagant structures. They burn energy not to survive, but to model, anticipate, and compare. They require margin. As margins shrink, awareness becomes fragile, not gone, just thinner. This is where the boundary between awareness and darkness becomes subtle. Consciousness does not vanish. It simplifies. Memory shortens. Prediction narrows. Attention contracts. Complex awareness gives way to reactive awareness, then to minimal awareness, then to none at all. Not because something breaks, because nothing can be afforded. This process is already visible, even now. On Earth, awareness is not evenly distributed. Some species experience rich inner lives. Some experience only immediate sensation. Some respond without any interiority we can recognize. This spectrum exists because awareness is expensive. The universe is not selective. It simply allows awareness where conditions permit it, and withdraws that permission when they no longer do. In the far future, this withdrawal will continue. Stars will provide less usable energy. Planets will cool. Chemical gradients will flatten. Life, if it exists then, will adapt downward. Simpler metabolisms, shorter memories, reduced responsiveness. Eventually, even adaptation fails, not because life is defeated, but because there is nothing left to adapt with. Awareness does not die. It becomes unnecessary. This distinction matters, because death implies loss. What happens here is resolution. A system reaches a point where additional processing no longer produces advantage. At that point, complexity unwinds. This is not tragedy. It is thermodynamics. Darkness does not erase awareness violently. It removes the conditions that make awareness useful. And usefulness is the only reason awareness exists at all. The universe does not preserve unnecessary processes. It does not oppose them either. It simply allows them to fade. Which brings us to a deeper realization. Awareness is not something that ends against the will of the universe. It ends with it. As gradients flatten, awareness has nothing left to do. No contrasts to notice. No futures to compare. No alternatives to evaluate. A universe at rest does not require witnesses. Not because witnesses are forbidden, but because nothing remains to be witnessed. This makes the boundary between awareness and darkness profoundly quiet. There is no dramatic crossing, just a gradual loss of relevance. This challenges one of our deepest fears. We often fear darkness because we associate it with annihilation. But annihilation is abrupt. Darkness is not. Darkness is what happens when everything finishes its work, which means the universe does not forget awareness. It outgrows it. This perspective reframes the entire cosmic story. The universe begins in darkness, not because it lacks potential, but because it has not yet created contrast. It passes through light and awareness not because it must, but because imbalance allows it. It returns to darkness not because it fails, but because nothing remains unresolved. Awareness is not a mistake. It is a phase with a beginning, a duration, and an ending. But endings do not negate phases. They complete them. This raises an uncomfortable question about our own moment. If awareness fades gradually, if it becomes less relevant over time, then what stage are we currently in? We live in an era of extraordinary surplus. Energy flows freely. Signals cross the planet instantly. Information accumulates faster than it can be processed. This abundance creates a density of awareness unprecedented in cosmic history. But density is not stability. It is strain. The more complex awareness becomes, the more energy it requires to sustain itself. The universe does not reward strain indefinitely. It allows it briefly. Then it lets it go, which means the most intense awareness may also be the shortest lived. Not because it is wrong, but because it is costly. This introduces a paradox. The closer the universe comes to full awareness of itself, the closer it comes to exhausting the conditions that make awareness possible. Awareness feeds on imbalance, but in feeding on it, awareness accelerates its consumption. This does not make awareness destructive. It makes it self-limiting, like fire. Fire is not evil, but it burns through what sustains it. When the fuel is gone, the fire does not argue. It goes out. Darkness does not kill the fire. The fire finishes itself, which means the universe's return to darkness is not imposed. It is earned. Every star that shines contributes to flattening gradients. Every thought that forms depends on gradients already in decline. We are living off stored difference, borrowed contrast, which means awareness is always living on borrowed time. This realization can feel heavy, but it can also feel clarifying, because it removes the illusion of permanence. Nothing we experience was meant to last forever, not because it is fragile, but because permanence belongs to darkness, not to light. And yet, this does not strip experience of value. On the contrary, it concentrates it. A moment that will never repeat does not need to repeat to matter. The universe does not ask awareness to justify itself eternally. It only allows it to occur once. This may be the most important insight of all. The universe does not cycle through awareness endlessly. It does not reboot. It does not reset to try again. This is not a rehearsal. This is the only luminous interval there will ever be, which makes the boundary we are approaching between awareness and rest the most significant transition reality ever undergoes, not because something ends, but because something completes. This completion will not be observed from the outside. There is no outside. It will be experienced only locally, gradually, quietly. Awareness will narrow, simplify, and dissolve, not into nothingness, into sufficiency, into a state where nothing more needs to be processed. Darkness, then, is not oblivion. It is adequacy, a universe that no longer needs to know itself. This leads to a final, deeply unsettling thought. Perhaps the reason darkness feels frightening is because it removes us from relevance, not because it removes reality. The universe does not fear darkness. Only observers do, because observers are temporary. Darkness is not. And yet, without observers, nothing is wrong. Reality does not suffer. It does not mourn. It simply rests. This means the most profound question we can ask is not what happens after awareness ends. It is what awareness is meant to do before it fades. If consciousness is a brief phase, if it appears only once, if it will not be preserved, then what is the responsibility of awareness during the short interval in which it exists? What, if anything, is awareness for before the universe finally returns to its ancient, effortless darkness? Responsibility is a human word. The universe does not assign it. It does not expect outcomes. It does not wait for conclusions. And yet, the moment awareness appears, responsibility feels inevitable. Not because the universe demands it, but because awareness creates perspective. To be aware is to stand somewhere, to notice difference. Recognize that things could unfold in more than one way. The instant that becomes possible, responsibility emerges, not as a rule, but as a consequence. Awareness does not ask, what should exist? It asks, what will happen if this continues? That question only exists where futures branch, and futures only branch while imbalance remains, which means responsibility exists only during the luminous interval. Darkness carries no responsibility, not because it is careless, but because there is nothing left to choose between. A universe at rest does not require ethics. It requires no judgment. It allows no alternatives. Responsibility is a feature of unfinished processes. We exist inside unfinishedness. This reframes responsibility in a way that is easy to overlook. Responsibility is not a moral burden placed on consciousness from outside. It is a byproduct of being able to see consequences. When awareness can model outcomes, it cannot avoid noticing that actions matter. But matter here does not mean cosmically important. It means locally influential. Responsibility is local, temporary, context-bound. The universe does not ask awareness to save it. It does not need saving. It will rest whether we act or not. Responsibility exists only within the narrow window, where actions still affect future states. And that window is closing, slowly, unevenly, quietly. This makes responsibility both precious and limited. We are not responsible for the fate of the universe. We are responsible for what happens, while influence is still possible. That is all. This may feel like a reduction, but it is actually a clarification. It removes impossible expectations. We are not meant to prevent darkness. Darkness is not a threat. We are not meant to preserve awareness forever. That is not within our reach. We are not meant to make existence permanent. Permanence is not the goal. Responsibility, then, is not about altering the universe's destination. It is about shaping the experience before arrival. The universe will rest. But the path to rest can be gentle or violent. Awareness does not change the endpoint. It changes the texture of the journey. This is where responsibility gains its real meaning, not in defying thermodynamics, but in modulating how imbalance resolves. Consider this carefully. The universe does not care how stars burn out, but sentient beings do. Pain and suffering are not cosmic quantities. They are experiential ones. They exist only where awareness exists, which means responsibility is not about preserving light. It is about reducing unnecessary harm during the era when light still allows experience. Darkness does not suffer. Only awareness does. And suffering is not required by physics. It is an emergent byproduct of complexity interacting poorly with itself, which means awareness carries a strange, quiet responsibility, not to extend itself indefinitely, but to minimize the cost of its own unwinding. This does not require heroism. It requires restraint. It requires recognizing that complexity is fragile, and that harm accelerates collapse rather than delaying it. Violence does not preserve awareness. It exhausts it. Exploitation does not extend the luminous era. It burns through it faster. Responsibility, in this sense, is thermodynamic. It is about how quickly gradients are consumed. Awareness can choose to burn brightly and briefly, or to burn slowly and gently. The universe allows both, but the experience within them differs profoundly. This is the deepest ethical implication of cosmic darkness. Not that everything ends, but that how things end is not fixed. Darkness is inevitable. Suffering is not. Awareness exists only long enough to influence the quality of its own disappearance. That is the entire scope of responsibility. Not infinite, but real. This perspective removes both despair and arrogance. We are not powerless, but we are not saviors. We are not meaningless, but we are not central. We are participants in a fading process who can make that fading kinder, or harsher, or indifferent. The universe does not judge the outcome. Experience does. And experience only exists now, this moment, this brief interval where awareness is still possible. This makes the present moment extraordinarily dense with consequence. Not eternal consequence, immediate consequence. Responsibility is not about eternity. It is about now. This changes how we might think about action. Action is not valuable because it echoes forever. It is valuable because it shapes the present. While shaping is still possible, darkness will erase echoes, but it will not retroactively erase experience. What was felt was felt. What was alleviated was alleviated. What was needlessly inflicted was needlessly inflicted. These are not cosmic facts. They are experiential facts. And experiential facts matter, not to the universe, but to those who experience them. This is why responsibility feels heavy. Not because it is infinite, but because it is brief. There is no second chance at this interval, no rewind, no reset. Awareness happens once, then it fades. Responsibility exists only within that one pass, which means procrastination is not neutral. It is a decision to let gradients resolve unguided. Sometimes that is fine. Sometimes it is not. The universe does not care, but awareness does. This may be the clearest articulation of our situation. We are not here to defeat darkness. We are here to decide how awareness behaves before darkness becomes unnecessary. And that decision is not abstract. It is embedded in every interaction, every structure we build, every system we reinforce or dismantle. Responsibility is not cosmic. It is intimate, local, fragile, temporary. And that is what gives it weight. Darkness will come, but it will not ask how we arrive there. Only awareness can ask that. And awareness exists now. This leads us to the next question, perhaps the most uncomfortable one yet. If responsibility is local and temporary, if it exists only while awareness exists, then what happens? When awareness begins to recognize that its time is limited, how does consciousness behave? When it understands deeply that it is not meant to last? When awareness begins to understand that it is temporary, something subtle changes. Not immediately, not dramatically. There is no universal moment of realization where consciousness collectively gasps and alters its course. Instead, the understanding arrives quietly, unevenly, in fragments. Some minds sense it early, some never do, some resist it entirely. But once the idea takes hold that awareness is not meant to last forever, behavior shifts. Not because of fear of darkness, but because of a new relationship with time. When something believes it will persist indefinitely, it postpones, it accumulates, it delays meaning. But when something understands its limits, urgency changes shape. Urgency does not always become frantic. Sometimes it becomes gentle. A mind that believes it has infinite time seeks expansion. A mind that understands its finitude seeks coherence. This distinction is crucial. Most suffering created by awareness does not come from limitation itself. It comes from denial of limitation. When consciousness acts as if it must last forever, it hoards resources. It exploits gradients. It accelerates consumption. It treats the universe as a storehouse meant to sustain awareness indefinitely. But the universe was never structured for that. Gradients are finite. Energy flows downhill. Imbalance resolves. When awareness refuses to accept this, it burns through what sustains it faster. Ironically, the attempt to preserve awareness indefinitely shortens the era in which awareness can exist. This is the paradox at the heart of conscious behavior. Denial accelerates ending. Acceptance slows it. Not because acceptance can prevent darkness, but because it reduces unnecessary strain. A consciousness that understands it is temporary, does not need to dominate the future. It needs to care for the present. This is where the tone of awareness shifts, from conquest to stewardship, from accumulation to balance, from urgency to attentiveness. Not everywhere, not always, but wherever this understanding takes root, behavior becomes less extractive and more reflective. This is not morality imposed from outside. It is thermodynamic intuition. A system that understands it is living on borrowed gradients, becomes careful with how it spends them. It does not try to freeze the moment. It does not try to escape the end. It tries to reduce damage, while the process completes. Reframes the meaning of wisdom. Wisdom is not the ability to outlast darkness. It is the ability to coexist with inevitability without turning it into violence. Awareness that understands its limits stops asking how to survive forever and starts asking how to dissolve without cruelty. This is a difficult shift. It requires letting go of the idea that persistence equals success. In cosmic terms, persistence belongs to darkness. Awareness was never meant to persist. It was meant to occur. This understanding does not weaken awareness. It clarifies it. Once consciousness recognizes that it is an event, not a fixture, it begins to behave like one. Events do not hoard. They express. They resolve. They leave no unfinished tension behind. This does not mean awareness becomes passive. It becomes precise. Actions are chosen not for infinite payoff, but for immediate experiential quality. Suffering is minimized not because the universe demands it, but because suffering has no long-term justification. There is no eternal record to vindicate it. Pain does not echo into infinity. It only exists now. which means it can be addressed now. This realization alters how time is perceived. When eternity is removed, moments gain density. Each experience matters not because it lasts, but because it will never repeat. This is not sentimental, it is structural. A non-repeating interval demands care. The universe will not return to this state. There will be no second luminous era, no reboot of awareness, no alternate run where choices are tried again. This is not because the universe is cruel. It is because gradients do not replenish. Awareness is a one-time event, and one-time events invite attention. This is where consciousness reaches a strange maturity, not the maturity of control, but the maturity of release. It stops trying to dominate outcomes and starts trying to complete processes cleanly. This does not require knowledge of cosmology. It emerges naturally wherever awareness senses its finitude. In individual lives, this awareness often arrives as aging. In civilizations, it arrives as ecological constraint. In species, it arrives as evolutionary pressure. In the universe, it arrives as entropy. At every scale, the lesson is similar. What does not accept limits behaves destructively. What accepts limits behaves harmoniously. Darkness does not punish resistance. Resistance punishes itself. This insight reframes the role of fear. Fear of darkness does not protect awareness. It distorts it. Fear drives hoarding. Hoarding accelerates collapse. Collapse intensifies fear. Acceptance interrupts this loop, not by surrendering to nothingness, but by cooperating with process. The universe is not hostile to awareness. It simply does not sustain it forever. Awareness that fights this truth burns through its own support. Awareness that accepts it extends the interval of meaningful experience, not indefinitely, but gently. This is the quiet power of understanding impermanence. It does not grant immortality. It grants grace. Grace is not extension of time. It is reduction of friction. A universe moving toward rest does not need resistance. It needs smoothness. Awareness, when it understands its role, becomes a lubricant rather than a spark. It allows gradients to resolve, with less suffering. This is not cosmic altruism. It is alignment. Alignment with the direction reality is already moving. This understanding also dissolves the fear of irrelevance. Awareness does not need to justify itself eternally. It does not need to be remembered forever. The universe does not archive. Existence does not keep records. What happens does not need to be preserved, to have been real. This removes a heavy burden from consciousness. We are not here to leave a permanent mark. We are here to participate cleanly in a temporary process. This does not strip meaning. It refines it. Meaning becomes experiential rather than archival. What matters is not what lasts, but what is felt. Not what is remembered, but what is alleviated. Not what dominates the future, but what improves the present. Darkness will erase records. It will not erase relief. It will not erase kindness, because those do not need to be remembered to have occurred. Not need witnesses beyond those who experienced them. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of impermanence. We assume that if nothing lasts, nothing matters. But mattering is not a property of duration. It is a property of experience. Experience happens now, and now is enough. This realization does not come easily. Awareness often resists it. It clings to narratives of legacy, permanence, transcendence. These narratives soothe fear, but often justify harm. They promise that suffering now will be redeemed later. The universe makes no such promise. Later is not guaranteed. Only now is, which means awareness that truly understands its limits cannot justify unnecessary suffering. There is no cosmic ledger, no deferred compensation, only experience unfolding in a narrowing window. This makes responsibility sharper, not heavier, clearer, not overwhelming. We are not responsible for the universe's fate. We are responsible for the quality of awareness while it exists. That is all. Darkness will not judge how we use this time, but awareness can. And awareness exists now. This leads us to the edge of the story. If awareness can mature into acceptance, if it can shift from domination to completion, if it can reduce harm as it unwinds, then the return to darkness does not need to be tragic. It can be gentle, not because the universe cares, but because awareness does. And awareness is the only place where gentleness is possible. This brings us to the final approach. If darkness is the universe at rest, and awareness is a temporary articulation within it, then what does rest feel like? From the last remaining perspective, before perspective itself dissolves, what is the texture of the universe's final quiet? As awareness releases its grip and allows existence to continue without observation, rest does not arrive with an announcement. There is no final moment when awareness says, "Now it ends," and then disappears. The transition is softer than that. Awareness does not fall into darkness. It loosens, like a hand that has been holding something for a very long time and finally realizes there is no reason to grip anymore. At first, nothing seems different. Thoughts still arise, sensations still register, memory still flickers, but the urgency that once tied them together begins to fade. Not because something is broken, but because nothing is being asked of them anymore. In the earlier phases of awareness, every perception mattered. Every signal carried potential consequence. Every choice branched into futures that still felt open. Here, that openness begins to close. Not abruptly, not violently, gently. Futures no longer branch widely. They narrow. Possibilities collapse not into catastrophe, but into sufficiency. What remains feels quieter, not emptier. Awareness no longer scans constantly for threat or opportunity. It no longer needs to project far ahead. The future stops demanding attention. This is where awareness begins to resemble rest. Not sleep in the biological sense, but a deeper release of orientation. Direction dissolves. Not north or south, but before and after. Time does not stop, but it stops insisting on being tracked. Moments still occur, but they no longer push against one another. They stop competing for significance. This is difficult to imagine because our own awareness is built on urgency. We evolved to care because caring improved survival. But when survival is no longer at stake, caring becomes optional. And when caring becomes optional, awareness relaxes. Darkness, at this boundary, does not feel like loss. It feels like the end of needing to decide, needing to remember, needing to hold on. The universe does not instruct awareness to let go. Awareness lets go because holding no longer serves a function. This is the most misunderstood aspect of the return to darkness. It is not forced. It is consensual. At the end of complexity, nothing is taken away. Everything finishes. This finishing has a texture. It feels like resolution without narrative. No conclusion is reached because nothing was waiting for one. Awareness does not summarize its existence. It does not judge whether it was worth it. Those questions belong to striving systems. At rest, evaluation dissolves. What remains is presence without agenda. Presence for something, just presence. And then, even that becomes unnecessary. Because presence itself requires distinction. It requires an inside and an outside, a watcher and a watched. At rest, that distinction fades. Not because awareness is destroyed, but because separation no longer has meaning. This is where darkness becomes something other than absence. It becomes continuity. The universe does not flip from awareness to non-awareness. It smooths the boundary between them until there is no boundary left to notice. Awareness does not vanish into nothing. It diffuses into being. This is not mystical. It is structural. When gradients disappear, processes that depended on them dissolve. Awareness depends on gradients. Without gradients, there is nothing for awareness to contrast itself against. No signal stronger than another. No moment louder than the next. Uniformity does not oppose awareness. It makes awareness unnecessary. This explains why darkness feels ancient. Not because it is old, but because it is what remains when differentiation ends. and differentiation is the engine of experience. When experience finishes, nothing is missing. Only something extra has gone quiet. This perspective strips darkness of its threat. There is no annihilation here, only simplification. The universe is not taking something away from itself. It is releasing a layer it no longer needs, like a system shedding a temporary scaffolding. Once its work is complete, awareness was scaffolding, not because it was useless, but because it was temporary by design. The universe did not make a mistake by becoming aware. It allowed awareness because it could, and it releases awareness because it no longer must. This is the deepest calm the universe ever reaches. Not the calm of emptiness, but the calm of completion. No loose ends, no unresolved tensions, no unspent gradients. Darkness here is not dramatic. It is thorough. It leaves nothing unfinished. This makes the return to darkness profoundly different from our fear of death. Death, as we imagine it, is interruption. The universe's darkness is not interruption. It is closure, not closure of a story, but closure of activity. The universe does not stop existing. It stops doing, and doing was never required for being. This reframes the entire arc we have been following. The universe begins in darkness, not because it lacks content, but because it has not yet differentiated. It passes through light and awareness. Because differentiation becomes possible, it returns to darkness. Because differentiation completes itself. Darkness is not the enemy of light. It is the envelope that contains it. Before, during, after, which means the universe is not on a journey from nothing to nothing. It is moving from rest through expression and back to rest. And rest is not inferior to expression. It is deeper. Expression is loud. Rest is stable. Expression consumes energy. Rest conserves it. Expression creates stories. Rest ends the need for stories. This does not diminish the luminous era. It completes it. The universe does not regret becoming bright. It does not regret becoming aware. Regret requires memory with longing. At rest, there is no longing, only sufficiency, which brings us very close to the end of this journey, not the end of the universe, but the end of the arc we have been tracing. We have followed darkness, from its ancient origin, through its temporary interruption, and toward its quiet return. But one final question remains. If darkness is not emptiness, not annihilation, not loss, if it is completion, then why does the idea of darkness still unsettle us so deeply? What is it, exactly, that we fear losing when the universe returns to a state where nothing needs to be seen, nothing needs to be remembered, and nothing needs to be aware at all? What unsettles us about darkness is not what it is what it removes. Darkness does not threaten existence. It threatens relevance. We fear darkness because we are creatures shaped by contrast. We define ourselves by difference between self and world, past and future, meaning and noise. Darkness dissolves those distinctions, and when distinctions fade, identity follows. This is the quiet fear beneath every fear of the dark. That everything will end, but that nothing will need to be someone anymore. Awareness, by its nature, is positional. It stands somewhere. It draws a boundary between inside and outside. I am here, with only store that is there. Is it so, friend? Darkness does not erase those boundaries violently. It makes them unnecessary, and without necessity, they dissolve. This is why the idea of a universe without awareness feels threatening. It is not because we imagine pain or void. It is because we imagine the absence of perspective. No point of view, no center, no here, most of ire. The universe does not lose content in darkness. It loses point of view. And point of view is where fear lives. Fear is always local. It exists only where there is a vantage point that can imagine loss. Darkness removes vantage points, not by destroying them, but by no longer supporting the conditions that produce them. This is deeply unsettling to minds that evolved to protect vantage points at all costs. Our biology equates the loss of perspective with death. But cosmic darkness is not death. It is the absence of perspective itself, which means there is no one left to experience loss. This is not annihilation. It is irrelevance of annihilation. And irrelevance feels colder than extinction. Extinction implies something dramatic happened. Irrelevance implies nothing happened at all. The universe did not care enough to mark the transition. That is what unsettles us. We want endings to matter. We want conclusions to be noticed. We want the universe to acknowledge that something important has finished. Darkness does not acknowledge. It absorbs, not violently, indifferently, which reveals something uncomfortable about us. We want the universe to validate our experience, to confirm that awareness was not just permitted, but significant. We want there to be a trace. But the universe does not leave traces by intention. Traces occur only when conditions preserve them, and preservation is temporary. Even light, our most trusted messenger, does not last forever. Photons stretch, signals dilute, information degrades. The universe is not built to archive. It is built to resolve, which means the fear of darkness is not really about darkness. It is about the loss of witness. We fear a universe where nothing remembers us. But memory is not a property of reality. It is a property of minds. When minds fade, memory fades. Not tragically, naturally. This fear becomes clearer when we consider what we value most. Not permanence, but being seen, being known, being felt. Darkness threatens none of these directly. It threatens their continuation. It threatens the idea that experience must echo to be valid, but echo is not required for reality. A moment does not need to be preserved to have occurred. Pain relieved was relieved. Joy felt was felt. Understanding reached was reached. Those facts do not need to survive to remain true. They do not need a cosmic witness. They only needed to be experienced, and experience happened. Which brings us to a critical realization. The universe does not erase the past. It simply stops carrying it forward. There is a difference. Erasure implies removal. What happens here is abandonment, not because the past is rejected, but because nothing requires it anymore. The universe does not hold grudges or nostalgia. It does not cling. It moves on by letting go. Darkness is letting go without ceremony. This is why darkness feels impersonal, not cruel, not hostile, just uninterested. And that lack of interest wounds something deep in us, because we want interest. We want to matter beyond ourselves. We want continuity of relevance. But relevance is not a universal feature. It is a local phenomenon. Relevance exists only where awareness exists. When awareness fades, relevance fades with it. Not because it was false, because it was local. This reframes the entire fear response. Darkness does not negate value. It removes the context in which value is defined. A universe at rest does not say, "Nothing mattered," end quote. It says nothing at all. Silence does not judge, which makes our fear of darkness deeply revealing. We fear silence because silence does not reassure. It does not tell us we were right to care. It does not confirm our importance. It does not promise remembrance. Darkness offers no validation, and validation is something awareness craves. But craving validation is a property of unfinished systems, systems that still need feedback. A universe at rest does not seek feedback. It has no loops left to close, which leads us to an unexpected inversion. Perhaps the fear of darkness is not a fear of loss. Perhaps it is a fear of completion. Completion implies no further input is required, no more adjustments, no more corrections, no more justification. Everything that could be done has been done. This can feel frightening to beings who define themselves by ongoing effort. We are accustomed to measuring worth by continuation, by growth, by expansion, by accumulation. Darkness halts all of that, not abruptly, but decisively. It says, nothing more is needed. This statement feels threatening because it removes the need for striving, and striving is how awareness asserts itself. Darkness removes the arena where striving made sense. This does not mean awareness failed. It means awareness finished, which is a very different idea. The universe does not dismiss awareness. It outlives the conditions that made awareness useful. That is not rejection. It is progression. But progression toward rest, not toward novelty. And novelty is what awareness feeds on. This explains why the return to darkness feels like erasure to us. We equate novelty with existence, but existence does not require novelty. It requires consistency. Darkness is consistent, which brings us to a final layer of understanding. The fear of darkness is not cosmic. It is psychological. It arises from our attachment to perspective, to identity, to the idea that being must be witnessed to be real. But being does not need witnesses. Witnesses need being. And when witnesses fade, being continues, unobserved, unconcerned, unchanged. This realization does not diminish us. It contextualizes us. We are not the universe's purpose. We are one of its temporary capacities, a way for reality to experience contrast. That capacity will close, and when it does, nothing will be wrong. Nothing will be missing. Only something optional will be gone, which suggests something both humbling and freeing. We do not need to be remembered forever. We do not need to leave a permanent mark. We do not need to justify existence. Existence does not require justification. It requires no approval, which means the deepest fear of darkness is not that the universe will end. It is that the universe will continue without caring that we were here. And that is a difficult thought for beings who learn to care as a survival strategy. But survival strategies are not cosmic truths. They are local adaptations. Darkness is what remains when adaptation is no longer needed. This perspective does not erase the sadness of impermanence, but it reframes it. Sadness arises because awareness is ending, not because reality is failing. The universe does not mourn, but awareness does. And mourning is not evidence of tragedy. It is evidence of attachment. Attachment exists only while differentiation exists. Darkness dissolves differentiation, and with it, attachment. This does not make the universe cruel. It makes it complete, which brings us to the final threshold. We have followed darkness from its origin, through its interruption, toward its return. We have examined light, structure, time, awareness, responsibility, and fear. There is only one step left: to let go of the question why. Because why only exists where alternatives exist. In darkness, there are no alternatives, only what is. The universe does not ask why it rests. It rests because nothing pushes it anymore. And when nothing pushes, nothing resists. This is not defeat, it is balance, which leads us to the final movement, not an ending, a settling, a quiet exhale. The universe does not close its eyes. It simply stops needing to look. And in that state, there is nothing missing, nothing wrong, nothing to fear. Only existence without commentary, which is where the last chapter must begin. There is no final sentence the universe waits to hear, no conclusion it prepares itself for, no last insight that completes everything. The idea of a last chapter belongs to minds that still expect closure. The universe does not. What we call the end is simply the point where nothing remains unresolved. Darkness, at that point, is not dramatic. It does not descend. It does not arrive. It is what has always been there. Once every other need has quietly fallen away, the universe does not switch off. It settles, not into emptiness, but into a state where nothing is being asked of it anymore. No pressure to expand meaning, no requirement to generate novelty, no obligation to be seen. Existence without performance. This is the condition we struggle most to imagine, because imagination itself depends on contrast. Imagination needs light and shadow, before and after, self and other. Darkness erases none of these violently. It simply makes them unnecessary. At rest, there is no inside and outside, no perspective that must be maintained, no vantage point from which reality needs to make sense. The universe does not become unknowable. It becomes uninterpreted, and interpretation was never mandatory. For a brief interval, interpretation happened. Light carved shapes out of darkness. Energy folded into matter. Matter organized into structures. Structures produced awareness. Awareness asked questions, not because the universe demanded them, but because the conditions allowed curiosity to exist. Those questions did not require answers to justify themselves. They were expressions of imbalance noticing itself, and expressions end when the conditions that support them fade. This does not retroactively diminish them. A wave does not become meaningless because it returns to the ocean. A flame does not become pointless because it goes out. Awareness does not lose its reality because it does not persist forever. Reality is not validated by duration. It is validated by occurrence. Something happened. That is irreversible. The universe can return to darkness, but it cannot undo the fact that it once became bright. It cannot undo the fact that it once generated complexity. It cannot undo the fact that it once looked at itself from the inside. That moment does not echo eternally, but it does not need to. Eternity is not a requirement. This is where the final misunderstanding dissolves. We assume that if nothing remembers, nothing mattered. But memory is not a cosmic ledger. Memory is a function of systems that still need continuity. When continuity no longer serves a function, memory fades. Not tragically, naturally. The universe does not erase its past. It simply does not carry it forward. Carrying forward is expensive. Rest is not. Darkness is the most economical state of reality. It costs nothing to maintain. No gradients to uphold, no flows to manage, no tensions to resolve. Just existence, evenly distributed. This is why darkness is ancient. Not because it is primitive, but because it is what remains. When everything unnecessary has finished, the luminous era was not an error. It was not a detour. It was a possibility that unfolded fully, and unfolding does not require repetition. The universe does not loop. It does not rewind. It does not try again. It moves forward by simplifying, which means what we are living through now is not a rehearsal. It is the only time awareness will ever exist. Not because awareness is sacred, but because the conditions that allow it will never recur. Gradients do not replenish. Once flattened, they are gone. This does not make the present moment sacred in a mystical sense. It makes it singular. There will be no second chance for this configuration of reality. No alternative run. No cosmic archive. What is happening now is the only version that will ever happen. And when it finishes cleanly. Not with ruin, with sufficiency. The universe will not miss awareness. Missing requires desire. Desire requires difference. At rest, there is no difference left to desire. But awareness may miss the universe. Not the universe itself, but the ability to participate in it. That longing is real, and it is not wrong. It is the final echo of imbalance, before silence becomes complete. But longing does not need to be resolved. It fades the same way everything else does, gently, which brings us to the most important realization of all. Darkness is not the opposite of light. Light is the interruption of darkness. Darkness is not the absence of meaning. Meaning is the local emergence within darkness. Darkness does not destroy identity. Identity dissolves when it no longer has work to do. The universe does not remove things. It finishes them. And finishing is not cruelty. It is closure without ceremony. This is why there is no final revelation waiting in darkness. No ultimate truth revealed at the end. Truth itself is a construct of awareness. Darkness does not reveal. It does not conceal. It simply is. This is deeply unsettling to minds trained to seek answers. But answers belong to questions, and questions belong to a phase of reality where alternatives exist. In darkness, there are no alternatives, only presence. And presence does not ask why. It does not need to, which means the story does not end with understanding. It ends with acceptance. Not acceptance of loss, but acceptance of sufficiency. The universe does not need to continue expressing itself. It has already done so, fully, once, and that is enough. The final quiet is not waiting for us. It is not watching us approach. It is not preparing to receive anything. It has always been there, holding everything that ever happened, without needing to acknowledge it. Before light, before matter, before time mattered, and after all of it, darkness is not the future. It is the background that never left. Light was the momentary foreground. Awareness was a brief focus. Now the focus softens. Edges blur. Distinctions relax. Nothing collapses. Nothing vanishes. Nothing is taken away. Only the need to differentiate dissolves. And with it, the need to watch. The universe does not close its eyes. Eyes were never required. It simply stops needing to look. And in that state, there is no question unanswered. Because there is no longer any need to ask, there is no loss. Because nothing essential is gone. There is no ending. Because nothing has stopped existing. There is only rest, ancient, effortless, complete. And somewhere within that completeness lies the quiet truth we have been circling all along. The universe was never trying to become something. It was only passing through a phase where becoming was possible. That phase included light. It included awareness. It included us. And now, slowly, without urgency or regret, it releases the need to become, not into nothing, but into everything evenly, unremarkable, unobserved, and perfectly sufficient.